Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge. Devil was at the elbow. He'll wake more than the dogs. Oh, sorry. It's fair to say I've been a little bit distracted of late. Ever since finishing what might just be the greatest book I've ever had the good fortune to lay my eyes upon. A book that has changed things for me. A book that left me feeling like Tomcat smoking a cigar in the dark, starry night. I simply had to talk about it. And that book is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West. It was released back in 1985 and to this day is still considered one of the greatest pieces of literature to ever to exist, exploring the Wild West shortly after the Mexican-American War of 1846 and all through the eyes of our 14-year-old lead character who is simply referred to as the Kid. Blood Meridian is a dark and deeply disturbing, no-holds-barred piece of text, and it is not for the faint of heart. Take that warning seriously, considering that it's coming from my deeply desensitised arse. This shit is rough. There were several moments in this book where I just had to stop and take a breath and really process the heavy, dark weight of what the hell I just read. Seriously, it's a lot. You have been warned. This breakdown is simply my deeply researched interpretation and understanding of the story. And of course, it's only right that I dress for the occasion. We're back. Blood Meridian starts in Tennessee 1846, telling the story of a 14-year-old boy simply referred to as the Kid. The opening sentence is simply, "See the child." McCarthy instantly tells the reader that whatever we may come to discover about this character, above all else, recognise that he is a child after all. Or should I say, Kid. Even in calling him the Kid, it attaches this subconscious sense of innocence to the character, whilst mimicking heroes of the Wild West, like Billy the Kid, who is a murderous outlaw who is idolised as an infamous legend of the West to this very day. McCarthy goes on to mention that the Kid's mother died in childbirth under the Leonid meteor shower of 1833. The Leonid shower of 1833 was an enormous meteor event. It's believed it caused a real state of fear and panic amongst the unknown people who witnessed it. I did do some research into the meaning behind meteor showers, and particularly with the Leonids, it seems that there seems to be a meaning of shedding old skin and a new beginning, implying the birth of someone spiritual or cosmic in nature, where meteor showers are considered moments where the veil between our world and the spiritual realm is thin. It is said on the opening page that, quote, "In him broods already a taste for mindless violence." The closing line of the very first page is quite striking, where McCarthy states, "All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man." It doesn't seem like a lot right now, but bear it in mind, we will be coming back to it. The Kid eventually runs away aimlessly from his drunkard father, stumbling from town to town before eventually arriving in Nacogdoches in the spring of 1849. The weather is dreadful and he decides to enter a church recital tent simply to find some shelter from it. Inside, an old man called Reverend Green is delivering a sermon about God following you always, whether you want him to or not. It is shortly after, in this church tent, that we finally meet Judge Holden. Described as being a bulking giant of a man with immense strength, without a single hair on his body and supposedly of albino pale skin. He is a well-read intellectual philosopher and a fine dancer and fiddler to match. A man who is capable of speaking many languages and is capable of charming and coercive manipulation with his very refined tongue. The judge steps forward to halt the sermon and accuse the priest of not only being a fake, but an illiterate felon who is hiding behind a godly garb and some recited lines from the good book itself. That this man is in fact wanted in several states for sexually related crimes with a child and a goat. The priest tries to defend himself and deny these accusations, pointing fearfully at the judge and saying, quote, this is him, the devil. Here he stands. But the crowds ignore the priest and quickly turn violent as chaos erupts inside the church tent. The Kid and many others find themselves drawing their knives, not to fight, but to cut through the tent walls and find themselves a safe way out, eventually moving on to a nearby bar, oddly finding Judge Holden already inside of the bar. And when they go to order a drink, It turns out the judge has already paid for it. We later hear the judge admit to some of the men in the bar, when he's asked about it, that he had never met that priest before in his life and he made the whole thing up at his expense. His admittance is initially met with a stunned silence that eventually turns into an erupting laughter. One man even buying the judge a drink, which is a very early insight into the very careless mindset towards life and death at this time. The kid, with nothing better to do and nowhere really to go, spends the rest of his days in said bar, wasting what little money he has left on whiskey. He eventually heads down to the Jake's, which is also known as an outhouse or a toilet, and finds himself getting into a knife fight to the death for the most pointless reason ever. Simply because, as he is walking to the Jake's, a man is returning from the Jake's. And where it has been raining so heavily, neither man is willing to step into the cloggy mud and allow the other one to pass. So I guess it's a fight to the death then. Fighting against an earless man with HT for horse thief and an F for felon branded on his face. This man is Lewis Toadvine. Their pointless fight is ended abruptly with a swift whack on the back of the head for both of them, leaving them unconscious. The book never directly says who did give the two men a whack on the head, and many readers just assume it must have been an officer of the law. But if you look into some very early drafts of Blood Meridian, it does seem that Cormac McCarthy was suggesting or insinuating that it was done by a character called Old Sydney. Which does make a lot of sense when you consider that when the two men wake up, they become best of friends. Naturally, and Toadvine offers the kid to come with him to a hotel to beat up a man called Old Sydney. The kid agrees and the two set off to the hotel. After a short ride, they arrive at said hotel and ask for Old Sydney, heading upstairs and knocking on the old man's door and receiving no reply. So Toadvine and the kid light a small fire underneath his door, breaking their way in and beating the hell out of Old Sydney, even taking an eye out in the process, leaving the old man for dead as the two outlaws flee from the quickly burning hotel and ride out of town as soon as they possibly can. With adrenaline coursing through their veins and riding off into the horizon, the kid looks back at the fire that they caused and sees Judge Holden staring right back at him with a very unnerving smile. But as we move on to the next chapter, the kid goes his own way and finds himself living out on the lam in the wild country, relying on theft and robbery to get by. He rests one night with his mule in a hidden cave where a feral old man resides and offers the kid shelter. The old man is referred to as the Hermit, and he reveals that he was once a wealthy slave trader. The Hermit, whilst displaying a former slave's severed heart pickling in a jar, goes on to blame women, whiskey, money, and black people as being the four pillars that can and will destroy the world as we know it. Ironically, all things that seem to refer to the Hermit's own past. But the Hermit goes on to say, "A man's at odds to know his mind, 'cause his mind is aught he has to know it with. He can know his heart, but he don't want to. Rightly so. Best not to look in there. It ain't the heart of a creature that is bound in the way that God has set for it. You can find meanness in the least of creatures. But when God made man, the devil was at the elbow. A creature that can do anything. Make a machine, and a machine to make the machine. An evil that can run itself 1,000 years. No need to tend it." With a naive and irresponsible ignorance to his own evil past, the Hermit still sees mankind as purely malicious. Where other creatures behave in such ways to survive or to adapt, mankind does it because it can, and because it enjoys it. And it always will be the case. Which is oddly prophetic for this character, considering the wars that are yet to come as of 1846. But as the kid sleeps that night in the cave, he is awoken suddenly with the Hermit loitering awkwardly over him, quickly fleeing upon realising that the kid is awake. I believe that Cormac McCarthy is insinuating that the Hermit was going to sexually assault the kid had he not woken. But I have seen other reports suggest that the Hermit was perhaps inspecting the kid spiritually. Somehow in his prophetical madness he could see something within the character of the kid, having previously mentioned to him that the kid has lost his way in the dark. Personally, knowing the harsh brutality of this world and the hypocrisy of its characters, I think that this was far more sinister than just a late night inspection. Because a man who scorns the maliciousness of men is still capable of maliciousness, for they too are that very thing that they scorn. And the Hermit proves that here with his words, actions, and lack of accountability for them. Humanity can hate its very nature, but it can never ignore it. Come morning, there is no sign of the hermit, and the kid rides on aimlessly once more, eventually meeting up with some cattle herders who inform him of a place called Bexar that has quite the reputation for its prostitutes. The kid wants to go there because, well, he has nowhere else to be or anything better to do, and the cattle herders let him join them on their journey, at least until they have to go in separate directions. They leave the kid with some food and a knife as he rides on alone for 4 days to Bexar. This is the first of just a handful of moments in this book where people are nice and civil to one another. It is usually very few and far between, and they're often very small acts, especially in comparison to the endless barbaric depravity of the rest of the book, but I do love the fact that McCarthy stops to highlight them, briefly showing some hope in quite a hopeless land. The kid finally arrives in Bexar and stumbles his way tiredly into a nearby bar. He offers to sweep the floor because he's run out of money in order to get a drink. But the Mexican barman refuses, claiming in Spanish that the floor has already been swept. The breakdown in communication leads to the kid sweeping the floor anyway, and when he's done the job and now expecting a drink, the Mexican barman still refuses him, which of course makes things turn violent. The kid snatches a bottle and smashes it over the barman's head, taking an eye out in the process, before he has to make a run for it and go living out on the lam again, with his only comfort being a stolen bottle of whiskey which he manages to drown his sorrows in. But soon after, a man on horseback approaches the kid, as the kid has gained quite the reputation with his violent acts towards Mexicans, which makes him the #1 draft pick for Captain White's army. With the promise of clothes and food, the kid agrees to join, eventually teaming up with his new comrades and sadly discovering their wrought racist hatred towards Mexico, as Captain White inducts him into the ranks and breaks him a horse to ride. Whilst the kid is here predominantly for a potential sense of belonging with other miscreants and runaways, his comrades are instead fueled by patriotism and seeking their justice for the outcomes of a war that is now finished. These filibusters want to take back the land that they fought for during the war, which was then later lost and given away. They wish to rule over the lands and its Mexican residents despite their clear hatred of them. They've twisted the morality of the situation into almost viewing it as a necessity, as if it was a good deed, as if the Mexican civilization is so savage that it would almost be a kindness to come charging into their lands and telling them how to live a more civilized way of life, and killing them if they refuse. The kid and a few other recruits head off to a nearby bar to have a celebratory drink before they head off with the army, but an old Mennonite offers them a bizarre warning through drunken ramblings. There is an old, disordered Mennonite in this place, and he turns to study them. A thin man in a leather waistcoat, a black and straight-brim hat set square on his head, a thin rim of whiskers. The recruits order glasses of whiskey and drink them down and order more. There are Monty games at tables by the wall, and there are whores at another table who look the recruits over. The recruits stand sideways along the bar with their thumbs in their belts and watch the room. They talk among themselves of the expedition in loud voices, and the old Mennonite shakes a rueful head and sips his drink and mutters. "They'll stop you at the river," he says. The second corporal looks past his comrades. "Are you talking to me?" "At the river, be told. They'll jail you to a man." "Who will?" "The United States Army, General Worth." "The hell they will. Pray that they will." He looks at his comrades. He leans towards the Mennonite. "What does that mean, old man?" "Do not cross that river with yon filibuster armed. You'll not cross it back." "Don't aim to cross it back. We're going to Sonora." "What's it to you, old man?" The Mennonite watches the enshadowed dark before them as it is reflected to him in the mirror over the bar. He turns to them, his eyes wet. He speaks slowly. "The wrath of God lies sleeping. It was hid 1,000,000 years before men were, and only men have power to wake it. Hell ain't half full. Hear me. Ye carry war of a madman's making onto a foreign land, and ye'll wake more than the dogs." This is oddly similar to an excerpt from Moby Dick by Herman Melville of 1851, where a mysterious character called Elijah prophesies doom for those who join Captain Ahab's journey upon the Pequod. The two books do share an awful lot of similarities in their overall themes, with McCarthy openly being a huge fan of Melville's work. The merry night of drinking continues, and the men wake to find the Mennonite once more in the morning, finding one of their fellow recruits dead in the courtyard with a broken skull. The Mennonite eerily passes them, telling them, that there's no such joy at the tavern as upon the road thereto. We've all experienced that feeling, right? You're going camping with some friends, you've got some beers, you're young, you're free, you're away from your parents. The drive there's amazing. Everyone's having a great laugh, singing along to the tunes, maybe having a cheeky drink to warm up. And then you get there, and it's camping, you know, cold, damp, uncomfortable, boring. Not quite what it's advertised as. And no, the Mennonite isn't talking about a camping trip, but the sentiment very much applies to the overall narrative, as well as Captain White's travels into Mexico. That the journey to the goal is more joyous and insightful than the achievement of the goal itself. And the Mennonite might have been onto something with his dark and mysterious warning, because Captain White and his patriotic star-spangled boys turn out to be a bunch of inexperienced idiots without the first idea on how to take back the land, except to march right into it without plan or strategy, which goes about as well as you think it would. A sickness quickly sweeps through the men, dwindling their numbers daily, whilst water and food is guzzled down and chomped through without care for the rest of the journey. Their buried dead and leftovers are attracting wolves that follow slowly behind them. And when the army is completely dehydrated on the move, they start to desperately pray for rain, celebrating in sheer delight when the darkened clouds suddenly poured down upon them. But it only lasted a very brief period, not even long enough for them to fill up their canteens. It's almost as if God is rejecting their pleas and cruelly teasing them. Weak, tired, and dwindled in number, Captain White's idiotic arrogance leads the men into an ambush from the native Indians in one of the coldest, most spine-chilling passages that this book has to offer. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number, half naked or clad in costumes Attic or biblical, or wardrobed out of a fevered dream with the skins of animals and silk finery, and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners, coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat, and one with an umbrella, and one with white stockings, and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some headgear, or crane feathers, or rawhide helmets that bore the horns of bull or buffalo, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards, and otherwise naked, and one in the armour of a Spanish conquistador, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of mace or sabre done in another country by men whose very bones were dust, and many with their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts, until they trailed upon the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked with bits of brightly coloured cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and the horseman's face is gaudy and grotesque with daubings like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious, all howling a barbarous tongue and riding down upon them like a horde from a hell more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and clothed in smoke like those vaporous beings in regions beyond, right knowing where the eye wanders and the lip jerks and drools. Chills. Every damn time. I think it's so clever that it draws upon the cyclical themes of war, with dented conquistador armour that would be centuries old by now, most likely taken as a trophy and now repurposed to deliver further bloodshed thousands of miles away from its origin. It suggests that this has meaning, not just for the armour or for the culture of Native Americans, but also for war. That war has respect, meaning, and an honoured traditional culture to it, consistently throughout man's existence, no matter who or where they were from. The kid survives this barbaric attack by falling off of his horse and finding himself at the rear of the attack. He slips away quietly with another wounded survivor by the name of Sproul. Sproul is a boy who is suffering with consumption as well as a very badly injured arm which is quickly becoming rancid with infection. The two walk aimlessly for days, passing some really horrifying sights, one of the most disgusting in the whole book being a tree that has very young people impaled upon it. Trying to word this as friendly as possible. There really isn't a way, to be honest. Oh, and they go past a church that has about 40 odd naked scalped corpses piled up inside of it as well. That's a fun couple of pages to read. But McCarthy isn't some sort of sicko. There is a real reason to this. He takes a lot of time to drown you, the reader, in the bloodshed of this environment and its time period to show that it is happening everywhere on all fronts, regardless of whether or not we were there to witness it or not. And in doing so, I think he cleverly displays grotesque violence for what it is. Grotesque. And this is what man is capable of. It removes the reasoning or the justification that the perpetrators would have told themselves in pursuit of the heinous act that they have performed. Which is an interesting juxtaposition to the cultural value of war displayed by the Native American slaughter the two had just escaped. Ultimately, Blood Meridian serves as an anti-Western. There are no heroes here, and it is extremely eye-opening and shocking, especially when you consider that this book came out in 1985, when Westerns had been and still were exceptionally popular and portrayed as the heroes in the 70s and early 80s across media. But anyway, back to the story. The kid does what he can for Sproul to keep them both alive as they hide from Mexicans and Indians on the plain, soon meeting what they assume to be certain death as a group of Mexican soldiers ride up to them, with the leader riding Captain White's horse. It's not looking so good for Captain White. The two young men are weak, unarmed and out in the open. All they can do is await their enemy's arrival. But, to their surprise, the leading Mexican soldier offers them a drink of water and claims, "When lost lambs cry, sometimes the mother comes, sometimes the wolf," before calmly riding on with his comrades and leaving the two Americans in peace. But I always read this with a hint of irony. The supposed wolf, the Mexicans, at least from the perspective of the Americans here, is helping them rather than slaughtering them with ease. I can't help but think he's essentially saying to these two Americans that we're not the monster that you've been told we are, and maybe that monster is a lot closer to home than you may care to recognise. Sproul's situation isn't getting any better, and the two don't exactly see eye to eye as their dreadful journey continues. The kid tries to save Sproul from a bat that sucks his blood in the night, but Sproul assumes that the kid was trying to kill him, which makes the kid turn up his nose at Sproul from here on, stating, "I know your kind. What's wrong with you is wrong all the way through you." Sproul judged the kid and wrongfully allocated blame. Sproul has none of the facts, but all of the assumptions, and he runs with them always. He never takes any accountability for the fact that the reason he is having such a hard time is because he signed up and agreed to do it. From his drunkard father, to the Hermit, to Captain White, and now Sproul, the kid is tired of everyone's holier-than-thou routine when these people are just as bad, if not worse than the kid. At least the kid is being honest about it. And with this, the kid feels further removed from that sense of belonging that he so desperately seeks. Despite the animosity, Sproul and the kid get on with the journey and eventually hold up a stagecoach and get inside, which ultimately ends up being Sproul's place of rest, as he does die on the journey. And things don't end up being much better for the kid either, as the stagecoach gets pulled over and the kid finds himself captured by Mexican soldiers. They drag him through the local town where a parade is taking place. In that parade, the kid is presented with Captain White's severed head pickling in a jar. The kid spits with a frustrated shake of his head, claiming, "He's no kin of mine," before being moved on to a jail in Chihuahua City. He's no kin of mine. Again, just further proof that the kid has become fully disillusioned with all of these people who think they know how the world should be, but so clearly have no idea at all. The jail is nothing short of disgusting and grim. A large group of naked men are stuffed in a hot and dark cell with excrement flung across the walls. The only upside being the kindness of a young Mexican girl who hides extra food within the prisoners' very limited meals. It is in this jail that the kid finds himself running into Toadvine once again. And he also makes friends with Granny Rat, who is more commonly referred to as the Veteran, who shares his stories of the Mexican-American War of which he served in. The kid tells them both about the Indians massacring the filibusters, whilst Toadvine is more concerned with wanting to kill a guard so he can steal his gold teeth. It's also mentioned that Mexican children like to throw rocks at the prisoners from a wall, and in a snap of anger the kid throws a rock back at them and hits a child on the head, knocking him off the wall. It's not specified, but I think the kid accidentally and stupidly kills a child here, or at least gravely injured him in a moment of rage. The book doesn't really dwell on it, but I find it so interesting that it goes out of its way to mention it, reaffirming that lust for mindless violence within our main character and his capability of performing it. Or possibly, in a very fittingly disturbing fashion of this book, it could serve as a foreshadowing metaphor of the kid killing a representation or image of himself, that being a child, which admittedly seems like a leap right now, but Be patient, it will make more sense by the end. One day in jail, the prisoners suddenly notice a very impressive gang riding into town, made up of several Americans, 4 Indians, a Mexican, and a black man too. And it's all led by a small, cold, dark-haired man by the name of John Joel Glanton, a notorious and feared scalp hunter of the West, leading a group that was known as the Glanton Gang. But most eye-catching of the ragtag crew was the second in command, Judge Holden. That man again. This seems like a good time to pause and give you all a little bit of a history lesson and let you know that Blood Meridian is a very honest and historically accurate book, at least in regard to the time period, the language, the cultures, and even some of the battles. In fact, several of these characters are historically accurate and proven to really exist. Cormac McCarthy actually moved out to Texas in the 15-year process of writing this book and followed the trail himself that the Glanton Gang went on. He even taught himself Spanish just to be able to write accurately for the Hispanic characters. But yes, John Joel Glanton is a very real man, and the Glanton Gang also really did exist. They existed at this very time period and are displayed in this book with utmost honesty, with their journey and actions being accurately based on the readings of Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession, A Recollection of a Rogue. Samuel Chamberlain was a legit member of the Glanton Gang, and his book that he initially wrote between the years of 1855 and 1861 talks of his time in the army and how it brought him to becoming a member of the infamous scalp hunting gang and his time that he spent with them. Sounds pretty similar to the kid's journey so far, doesn't it? But the most shocking truth to come from My Confession is that Judge Holden is also a real person. Samuel Chamberlain describes a 7-foot-tall man called the Judge. Chamberlain admits that he hated the judge from the second that he met him, despite Judge Holden being friendly, charming, cultured, well-educated, capable of speaking several languages and serving highly in command of the gang, often giving lectures and teachings around the campfire. Chamberlain describes Judge Holden as hairless, which back then meant without a beard. But through the years, however, you can easily see how that's translated to utterly hairless. In fact, there are sketches in My Confession, and this one here of the judge depicts him with very long dark hair. And to explain the gang's arrival at Chihuahua City right now is that at this very time, between Mexico, the native Indians, and America, nobody really likes each other. The war has only just finished, and tensions are still a little bit high to say the least, especially in lawless land, of which there was an awful lot of it back then. It really was only the cities that managed to hold any sort of strong law enforcement present at all. So, scalp hunters were essentially paid to go clean up the troubles on the doorstep, with the scalp being proof of the work in receiving payment. In this particular scenario, the Glanton Gang are arriving to take on a contract from the governor of Chihuahua City to collect native scalps at $100 a scalp and $1,000 for the head of the Apache leader, Gomez. And just before we do dive back into the story, I think it's important that I mention some of the gang members that are important and will be coming into play very shortly. It's hard to say for sure how many members exactly there are in the Glanton Gang. It grows and depletes throughout the story, but I'm led to believe they are quite strong in number at the point of introduction. Probably a good 30 men, I would reckon. Don't worry, you don't need to know all of them. But the members that you will need to know, outside of the judge and Glanton, are Black Jackson, who is the black man in the gang. The Mexican man I mentioned is named Juan Miguel, but the Americans are too lazy to pronounce it correctly, so he's better known as John McGill. You have the 4 Delaware Indians, who are pretty quiet characters, mostly keeping to themselves and still following their own culture and beliefs. They seem to act as good trackers and scouts for the gang. We also have Davy Brown, a particularly violent and aggressive member of the gang, and we have Tobin, better known as the ex-priest, who seemed to run in with the gang shortly after the Mexican-American War had ended. A couple of other members do get mentioned, like Webster, Harlan, Tate, Grimley, and Dick Shelby, but they just aren't as integral to the story as the others. Now you know the history, let's return to the story. Toadvine thinks it's a surefire way to get out of prison if they make themselves useful to the gang and try to join them. And the plan works. The business of the Glanton Gang means that they go through an awful lot of members, so Glanton was always looking to recruit, and being white American wasn't a prerequisite, as you can see from the current members of the group. If you can shoot and you want to kill, Glanton will take you. So now, as members of the Glanton gang, they ride out from Chihuahua City with roses thrown to them from women on balconies and young boys chasing after them with great admiration. They head out to roam the Wild West and hunt down natives for their scalps. But that heroic facade is quickly broken as the gang roam from town to town. Glanton buys himself some new guns and decides to test them out on the local animals. And if that wasn't bad enough, he even haggles the price down on the weaponry. The commotion, of course, raises the authorities, but the judge's smooth tongue manages to calm things down and even negotiate the gang's brief stay, being particularly soothing towards their concerns over Black Jackson. It was a very different and racist time. We gain another new member of the gang here called Bathcat, also referred to as the Van Diemen Lander. He is a fugitive of Wales who moved to Van Diemen's Land, which is present-day Tasmania. He used to hunt Aborigines for sport and wears a necklace of human ears around his neck. He'll fit in just fine. What's interesting about Bathcat is that McCarthy warns you of his upcoming death upon meeting him. It is mentioned that he has a tattoo that Toadvine will see once in a Chihuahua bathhouse, and again when cutting down his desecrated corpse from the bamboo that it hung from. You may have already noticed themes of destiny and fate in the small portion of the story that we've explored. But here McCarthy interestingly just says it outright, as if it was sealed and confirmed upon this very moment. The gang also pick up a family of performers who seek protection on their travels, to which Glanton accepts for a price, and the gang head back out on the road, passing the horrors and death of the Wild West on their way. One morning, the judge notices that Granny Rat is missing. He questions the kid and Toadvine, who shrug and say that they assume he quit and rode off in the night. The judge raises 2 of the 4 Delaware Indians and sends them back to look for Granny Rat. A few days pass and the Delawares return with Granny Rat's horse and belongings, the latter of which they burn. You can die and be replaced from the gang, but you can't quit. One night at the campfire, Glanton asks the family of performers if they read fortunes, to which they nod and ready their cards for reading. The family draw tarot cards for 3 members of the gang, being Black Jackson, the Kid, and Glanton, in another excellent passage which I would revise to you, but an awful lot of it is in Spanish, so I'll just give you the basic rundown. Black Jackson draws first, receiving the full tarot card. The Mexican wife, who is blindfolded by the river and facing away from the gang, is speaking prophetically in Spanish regarding each drawn card's meaning. Jackson asks Tobin what she's saying, but the ex-priest wants no part in any of this. The judge explains to Jackson that the woman is saying that the fate of the gang is tied to Black Jackson's fate, and when Black Jackson asks what that means, the judge comically explains that the woman is telling him to avoid rum. It's interesting to note that all whilst this is happening, the judge was picking small life from the folds of his skin and making a gesture of blessing before flicking something from his fingers into the fire, almost as if he is performing a ritual of his own to influence or counter the mystic workings of the readings. The full tarot card isn't as bad as it may sound at first, as it seems to generally represent new beginnings or the dawn of discovery and adventure, which becomes fitting for Black Jackson as the story proceeds. The Kid draws the 4 of Cups, which is an interesting card, and from my research and what seems to make the most sense regarding the Kid, is that the 4 of Cups seems to represent a lack of purpose, or losing one's way as the Hermit suggested. It represents a need for introspection and search for truth in a shroud of uncertainty. The card often depicts someone looking at 3 cups with a 4th just out of their eyesight, perhaps suggesting that the Kid isn't seeing the bigger picture or making the best choices on offer to him. But the Kid thinks very little of this and inverts the card of his own doing before returning it to the deck. With some further research, I discovered that an inverted tarot card usually reverses the card's original meaning, so it is interesting that the Kid unknowingly inverts the card himself, as if to metaphorically reject that potential purpose and guidance, blindfolding himself to that bigger picture and truth that the card represents. It's briefly stated earlier in the book that the Kid saw this card before when he was travelling through a Mexican town with Sproul, and it appears once again later in the story. McCarthy definitely ties the card's meaning to the Kid's pursuits, with some real intention and another ringing of fate and destiny attached to this story. And last but not least, Glanton's card is drawn, who originally didn't want to draw, but eventually does, as the judge insisted. But Glanton's card gets blown away in the wind, never to be unveiled to the reader, but it is suggested that Glanton caught the slightest glimpse of what he had drawn and perhaps purposely let it go. It is said, after all, that Glanton is a man that is hell-bent on pursuing his own fate, and possibly wouldn't want to know or have some magical card decide anything for him, whether intentionally or subconsciously. But the blindfolded woman at the river continues to chant and prophesy in Spanish, as if she had somehow seen the card, and if we translate what she is saying, it offers quite a cold and haunting revelation for what is to come. In a loose translation, the woman says, the carriage, inverted, cart of war, of revenge, I saw it without wheels on a dark river. Glanton demands that she shuts up, as the weather suddenly worsens, as if on cue. Lost, the carriage is lost in the night. A curse, what a wicked wind, a carriage of the dead, full of bones. The boy that. She's interrupted and doesn't finish. It never is explicitly stated in the book what card Glanton drew, but I think we can safely guess that it was the chariot card inverted, considering the woman saying the carriage inverted. The chariot is a card that usually represents victory, the power of human will, and even hubris, except for when it is inverted, of course. Inverted, the chariot represents recklessness and a lack of self-control, with careless consequences for those around you in your pursuits. An extremely fitting reading for Glanton. I think what she says also has a second meaning, and potentially even a third, from the final sentence that she doesn't finish, but I'll bring those up at the relevant time. There is a fascinating theoretical article online that deeply divulges the meaning of tarot in Blood Meridian, even claiming that all 22 major arcana cards appear through the story at one point or another. An example of one that we have already seen would be the Hermit, and yes, there is a tarot card called the Hermit. And if you're interested, it usually represents wisdom and consideration, which the character did kind of portray, at least in his own twisted and disturbing fashion. And yes, I did have to learn basic tarot for this, so if that isn't worth a like and a subscribe, I don't know what is. As you can imagine, the reading with Glanton gets out of hand as the man drawing cards clumsily falls into Glanton, obviously annoying the gang leader and bringing about threats of violence as the Spanish woman continues to prophesy despite Glanton yelling for her to shut up. And interestingly, the judge is described as, quote, a great ponderous djinn, as he collects Glanton and brings the performance to a close. It's an interesting choice of words after discovering that early Islamic beliefs considered jinns or genies to be the work of the devil, one such jinn in the Quran even taking the name Satan. After another long day of travelling, the gang make camp once more, and all is calm until things get heated between the two Jacksons. The two Jacksons have never got on, the shared name and racial tensions seemingly being enough for their hatred of one another, and the gang find it all quite amusing, even placing bets as to which Jackson will kill the other first. And it doesn't take long for that bet to be settled, when that night White Jackson refuses Black Jackson a seat by the fire and racially insults him. Black Jackson responds by decapitating White Jackson with one clean swing of his Bowie knife. I find it interesting that in this horrifying moment, the gang seem utterly unfazed. Nobody panics, nobody cares, there's no punishment or judgment for murder of your supposed brother-in-arms. The only reaction mentioned is that Tobin, the ex-priest, slightly pulls his foot back as the removed bleeding head lands near him. That's all. They don't even offer the dignity of a burial. It's said that the gang moved on in the morning and that the corpse remained slumped against a tree with his cigarette burnt down to the fingertips and his boots stood smartly beside him. And that's that. Never brought up again, and nobody cares. And from this point forward, the judge seems to take a real liking to Black Jackson. There are several moments in the book where the judge and Black Jackson are seen performing some sort of ritual together in odd religious garbs. Perhaps this is the new beginnings that the full tarot card prophesied. The judge even expresses deep concern when Black Jackson goes missing after one of the gang's skirmishes goes a little south. The judge even heads out personally to go and find him, returning with Jackson in the nude, with nothing but a blanket around him and his pistol in hand as he shivers quietly and shamefully by the fire. This part could be read a few ways. Perhaps Jackson simply got left behind in the skirmish and lost his goods. Perhaps he was caught short with a prostitute when it all went down, hence the lack of clothes. Or perhaps he was trying to leave the gang, get away from the judge that has gotten exceptionally close to him, and perhaps the nudity was a punishment by the judge to shame Jackson on his return to the gang and remind him of his duties, giving him a second chance unlike he had done with Granny Rat. After all, the fate of the gang lies in the fate of Jackson according to the tarot card readings, and it seems that the judge takes that very seriously. The gang move on with their travels, finding very little around in the barren deserts, eventually stumbling across a string of houses of which gang members investigate one by one. Two members of the gang drag out an old native woman and drop her to her knees before Glanton distracts her with one hand before shooting her in the head with the other, telling his men to collect the receipt as they scalp her. She was of no threat to them, and it didn't matter. A native scalp is a native scalp, and a native scalp means money. The gang soon find themselves at an old presidio, where a few men remain dwindled in number and are becoming quite sick and withered by starvation. They leave a badly snake-bitten horse to go mad in the fields, explaining that they were waiting for it to die of natural causes before they ate it. The sooner it happens, the sooner they run out of food, showing no regard or intellect to the fact that it's snake-bit, and not knowing how to answer when asked by the gang. The judge mocks these foolish men in their dwindling days by teaching them of a false religion where they should worship the rocks. And of course, they blindly believe him, before the judge moves on and befriends a young Mexican boy who is seemingly orphaned and belonging to none. Glanton spits and shakes his head disapprovingly to the matter. I can't imagine why. In this time, the kid has become quite friendly with another member of the gang, Tobin, the ex-priest. The two often discuss the judge with great curiosity in hushed tones around the fire. The kid is curious as to how the judge came to be so well-versed and skilled, but Tobin explains that asking the judge where he learnt all these incredible skills and knowledge is futile, for when the judge was asked who taught him to speak Dutch, the enormous albino simply replied, "A Dutchman." Tobin finds this unsettling, as the judge himself proves to the ex-priest that God is indifferent to learnedness and perhaps unfair or unwise in who shall receive such gifts. But his faith always resides, as he goes on to tell the kid, "For let it go how it will," he said. God speaks in the least of creatures. The kid thought him to mean birds or things that crawl, but the ex-priest, watching, his head slightly cocked, said, "No man is gave leave of that voice." The kid spat into the fire and bent to his work. "I ain't heard no voice," he said. "When it stops," said Tobin, "you'll know you've heard it all your life." "Is that right?" "Aye." The kid turned the leather in his lap. The ex-priest watched him. "At night," said Tobin, "when the horses are grazing and the company is asleep, who hears them grazing? Don't nobody hear them if they're asleep?" "Aye." "And if they sees they're grazing, who is it that wakes?" "Every man." "Aye," said the ex-priest. "Every man." The kid goes on to tell Tobin that he had met the judge before, but Tobin is unsurprised, claiming that every member of the gang had met the judge before. He tells the kid the story of how the gang came to meet the judge. The gang had been whittled thin and were low on supplies and ammo as native Indians hunted them down on the plains. All that the gang could do is keep moving, and as they did, they eventually stumbled upon the judge, who was sat curiously upon a rock. He had no food, water, or horse, and yet seemed utterly unbothered. In fact, he seemed happy to see them. It was as if he had been sat there waiting for them. He had with him then the rifle he had now, engraved in Latin unlike any other, "Et in Arcadia ego," which translates to, "Even in Arcadia, there I am." The phrase is often used to suggest the balance of life and death, that nothing is truly perfect, for it would be stifled by a total lack of meaning or have no capability of growth and evolution if it was. That even in paradise, death awaits all. By being futile, it in itself becomes precious. And it seems that the judge sees himself as that death waiting for you, wherever it may be. Even in Arcadia. Tobin continues with his story, explaining that the judge guided the gang up a rocky volcano path, collecting sulphur, charcoal and potassium nitrate along the way as they explored the residing caves. The gang mix it together with urine before drying the black sludge in the hot sun to create gunpowder. Enough gunpowder for the gang to fight off the ensuing Indians and put the gang greatly in the judge's debt. This segment is often very decisive in most readers' understanding of Judge Holden as a character, as the tale that we hear about the judge's joining of the gang is exceptionally reminiscent of John Milton's poem Paradise Lost from 1667, where Satan takes his fallen angels to a volcano to build cannons and gunpowder in his war against heaven, which inevitably leads people to believe that Judge Holden is simply the devil. And it is totally an understandable reading. We have already had two fairly direct moments where the judge has been called or referred to as the devil, with this moment serving as a third. So there's undeniably plenty of evidence to lead you to such a conclusion. But McCarthy's writing is far more profound and conscious than simply making a direct translation of another piece of popular work and calling it a day. I don't believe that the judge is Satan in human form. To not keep you waiting in suspense, I think what they are touching upon here with the judge is the idea of Gnosticism, which is an idea that McCarthy has always been fascinated by. Gnosticism is a very headache-inducing subject. I have tried to study it and get a deeper understanding of it for this video to the best of my ability, and it has been very difficult to digest and fully contemplate, but if I have my understanding correct, Gnosticism, in layman terms, is the idea of godhood being pursued and carved out by knowledge, which in turn gives the pursuer power. It invokes the idea that these gods we consider so almighty are really not that different from us at all. It's just that they had the initiative to seize control by pursuing the facts of the world, or in turn, deciding themselves on behalf of everyone else. Which is very much what the judge does consistently throughout the book. He judges and decides, whether it be with a jotted scribble in a notebook or a lying accusation of a priest. And that doesn't mean that I think his mystic ways are a performance or an act. I think he truly does see something in these odd rituals and readings that he performs so oftenly. But again, I fear that that intrigue probably comes more out of the fact of him trying to find a way to manipulate it or ultimately control it. And much like a god or messianic figure, he does seem to have these followers, whether they even realise they're following him or not. When asked about these cyclical themes that come up in his stories, McCarthy simply and vaguely answered with, "Books are made of other books." And he has got a point. Everything is inspired by something, whether minutely or almost entirely ripped off. Just like a memory of a memory of a memory. How many renditions of Hamlet or Macbeth have we seen in our time on this planet under so many different skins? And it hits quite poignantly here, as it also is so applicable to the narrative. Not just in these references to older books that came before, but the brutal and short existence that this world of Blood Meridian offers its characters that are so quickly replaced and forgotten. Anyway, back to the narrative. The gang ride on through the woods with a giant grizzly bear appearing from nowhere to snatch up one of the Delaware Indians in its mouth, running away whilst crunching through the man's bones as his frightened screams fade through the trees. He is never seen again, despite the fellow Delaware Indians riding after him and only returning with his belongings. Even nature can't resist a bit of bloodshed. At the fire, after discussing and debating whether members of the gang want to be sketched into Judge Holden's books and whether they want the judge's drawn portrayal of them to be the deciding image of themselves for whatever future uncovers it, the judge, in response, tells the gang an interesting yet bleak story of a harness maker. The story is of a harness maker whose business was failing miserably, and so he decided to dress as a native Indian and deceive people with begging, bribery, or robbery. His wife and 2 children, who now live out in the woods with him, fear the harness maker and his worsening madness, suspecting foul play, yet silently going along with it the best that they can. One day, a traveller realises the whole scam and scorns the harness maker, making him see the error of his ways before solemnly inviting the traveller back to his home to meet his wife and 2 children. The dinner goes well, and the wife and children particularly enjoy the new and kind company. But the harness maker's greed ruins things again. The traveller willingly gives the man 2 coins for his stay, yet the harness maker wants more, and the traveller scorns him once again. It is time for the traveller to leave, and the harness maker's wife begins to cry, as the harness maker offers to ride the traveller back out onto the road safely. But it is in this ride that the harness maker kills the traveller, robs his corpse and buries him out in the woods. The harness maker lies to his family, telling them that they were attacked, but his wife mournfully tends to the grave of the good man on a regular basis. Years pass by, and now on his deathbed, the harness maker confesses his crimes to his son. The boy forgives his father, but deep down, he was not sorry. He was jealous of the dead traveller. The boy scattered the dead man's bones in a fit of rage and hysterics, eventually heading west and himself becoming a murderer. The wife, however, thought that animals had dug up the grave and scattered the good man's bones. She collected as many as she could and returned them to the site of rest, going on to claim that it was her son's grave that she tended to which the judge concludes, perhaps by that time, was so. The reason the judge is telling this story in relation to the gang's debate of what a drawn image of them now might represent in the future is to prove that it shouldn't matter. Members of the gang, like the characters in the story, are limiting themselves now based on some unknowable and assumed improvement that once was or will be. The son of the harness maker is damned by not only his father's actions, but by the legacy of this brilliant traveller that arrived and caused all of this to happen. How How can he live up to any expectation with some idolised symbol of perfection being held over him and having had such a direct effect on his life to this point? And the judge stops to point out that he happens to be telling this story in the once home of the Anasazi, a long-forgotten ancient tribe who ruled the very land they rest upon at this moment. If the greats before you stood tall and failed, what hope in hell do you have? The judge believes that it is through violence and fighting to survive that someone can transcend into greatness, that it is these self-made morals of frozen gods, as he describes the traveller, which holds us back. Delivering this frankly horrifying speech when asked about the proper raising of a child. Why you would want the judge's opinion on this, I don't know. At a young age, said the judge, they should be put in a pit with wild dogs. They should be set to puzzle out their proper clues, the one of 3 doors that does not harbour wild lions. They should be made to run naked in the desert until... Hold on now, said Tobin. The question was put in all earnestness. And the answer, said the judge. If God meant to interfere in the degeneracy of mankind, would he not have done so by now? Wolves cull themselves, man. What other creature could? And is the race of man not more predacious yet? The way of the world is to bloom and to flower and to die, but in the affairs of men there is no waning, and the noon of his expression signals the onset of night. His spirit is exhausted at the peak of its achievement, his meridian is at once his darkening and the evening of his day. He loves games? Let him play for stakes. This you see here, these ruins wondered at by tribes of savages, do you not think that this will be again? Aye, and again, with other people, with other sons? The judge looked about him. He was sat before the fire naked, save for his breeches, and his hands rested palm down upon his knees. His eyes were empty slots. None among the company harboured any notion as to what this attitude implied, yet so like an icon was he in his sitting that they cautious spoke with circumspection among themselves, as if they would not waken something that had been better left sleeping. There is an awful lot to unpack there. For one, we actually get some insight into the title of the book. Unlike the rest of the world, man does not disappear. We die, but more come in our place. Our spirit is exhausted at the peak of its achievement, which equally signals its end. His meridian is at once his darkening and evening of his day. Our highest point becomes our lowest point because the goal is now achieved, and we are left without a purpose. The title itself brings me back to the Mennonite speech of there being no such joy at the tavern as on the road thereto. Because in this speech of the meridian being our highest point and our lowest point, the judge is acknowledging that the achievement is also the end. It is the joy found on the way there that really mattered. But what is any of it without stakes? If there is nothing to gain or lose from it, why do it? Those stakes to Judge Holden would be life or death itself. That there is nothing nobler than killing and surviving, to be the only thing that survives. Judge Holden believes that humanity should acknowledge and accept that not only is man good at killing, but man enjoys it. So why not revel in it? He believes that this approach would bring mankind to its true potential as it answers to its most innate natures, rather than moralistic social constructs that have been built on the thoughts, emotions and feelings of individuals and expected to be adapted to by all. Whereas with violence, there is no adapting. It was always there within you, waiting to come out. It's a part of who you are. It felt good and you most likely came out of it with some riches too, so why should we repress it and view it so shamefully when no other species does? And seen already throughout the book, so many clearly view violence as a necessity, or add their own cultural and ritual beliefs to it. It seems to be so clearly natural to man, unlike general civility. And if God refuses to intervene with it too, then the big guy upstairs must be on board with the idea, right? Well, that's the judge's take on the idea. The title Blood Meridian, along with this speech, evokes the widespread bloodshed that was spilled in America's expansion at this time. And with the subtitle of Or the Evening Redness in the West, suggests America's success in the end, despite the stained red of blood cast across it. Whilst also suggesting that a new dawn will soon arrive. Whether further bloodshed for achievement shall be spilt upon it is yet to be seen. Perhaps it could be the start of a prosperous rebirth. But a meridian in itself is cyclical, so along with the bleak nature of the book and of course the real history, it would suggest that to be wishful thinking. The other important factor of this speech is that not only does it explain the judge's liking of Black Jackson due to his willingness to kill and survive against the many prejudices he faces, but the judge seems to be describing the kid. He set out alone at a young age in dangerous lands and adapted without morality, based instinctively on his own need to survive, and did so with an open honesty to what it is, even coming to scorn those with moralistic bluster to justify their violence and make themselves seem heroic in the depraved acts. That is exactly what the judge believes in, and the judge backs up those beliefs with his very presence in the gang. Despite all of these skills and capabilities that could very easily make the judge a man of power and wealth, he instead hangs out with the lowest of the low to perform endlessly depraved acts, all because he believes there is nothing better for man to do. The judge and the kid might be more kindred spirits than we first realised. At this time, Glanton gets a dog by befriending it with some jerky and patting it. I think on some level it does show an insight into Glanton, this twisted killer's morality, because it wasn't all that long ago that he was very happily shooting animals when buying his pistols. But now he wants a pet? I don't think that this suggests that Glanton is a dog lover, not necessarily. I think it shows that Glanton likes being in the presence of people, or in this case animals, that do what he says. The gang soon find themselves approaching an Apache village, riding quietly and starting their unsuspecting attack with clubs before opening fire with guns once the commotion truly began. At the end of the fight, Glanton is described as being drenched in blood whilst wrangling several weighty heads in one hand by a twisted knot of hair, with every step he takes crunching bones beneath him. He asks the judge if one of the heads he has gathered is the Apache leader Gomez. The judge says no, and that the head won't pass for Gomez either, when Glanton suggests trying to blag the head as Gomez anyway. Glanton then interrupts to look around curiously before casually asking, "You ain't seen my dog, have you?" Just utterly cold and indifferent to the heinous horror that he and his men have just committed, and more bothered by where his dog has gotten to than the many innocent lives that they just barbarically ended. He's so damn disrespectful that he would even lie about doing the job to its fullest for a few extra coins, knowing full well that it would come back to bite them. There isn't any regard for anyone or anything but themselves, and it has become as normal as blinking for the Glanton gang. And just when you thought Glanton couldn't sink any lower, Juan Miguel, the Mexican member of the gang, comes out of one of the Apache homes with a lance through his stomach. He stumbles down with weary breaths as the kid approaches him to help, but the kid is sternly snapped at by Glanton, who tells him to back off, as Glanton quickly draws his gun, shoots Juan Miguel in the head, and immediately scalps him. His own man. A reliable member of the gang, capable of translations and helpful in negotiations with Mexicans, dead and scalped just like the rest. I think on some note, Glanton does this out of habit and bloodlust, seeing as Miguel is Mexican and not native. But also it could be the start of an idea that Glanton later puts to fruition. And right now he simply thinks one Mexican scalp in a giant pile of Indian scalps would easily blend in and get them some more money. And if they got caught, well, it's only one. Simple mistake, something's gone wrong there, whoopsie. Probably wouldn't cause too much of a fuss. The gang rests after the slaughter, rounding up the scalps and claimed treasures, whilst Davy Brown moans noisily about an arrow shaft stuck in his thigh, of which the whole gang ignores. Except for the kid, that is, who steps up to help despite Tobin's warnings and successfully gets the arrow shaft out of Davy's leg. But upon returning to Tobin, the kid gets scolded by the ex-priest, saying, "Fool lad, God won't love ye forever. Don't you know he'd have took you? He'd have took you, boy, like a bride to the altar." What the kid is failing to see in the members of the Glanton gang, despite it clearly showing itself to be the case, is that it's essentially every man for himself, with no rules or morality or civility. If the kid had messed up the removal of the arrow shaft, there is absolutely no doubt at all that Davy Brown, a particularly violent member of the gang, would have killed the kid there and then. No issue. Tobin manages to dress it all up as God being on the kid's side, but not to push his luck, and maybe wise up in future. Now, if you remember back at the Presidio, the judge befriended a young orphaned Mexican boy and kept him along with the gang for their travels. And it is said that one morning Toadvine had seen the judge playing with the boy, but when Toadvine returned in the afternoon, The judge had viciously murdered the boy and was cleaning the boy's scalp in his lap. You're probably asking, why would the judge take an orphan boy, befriend him, keep him happy for several days, only to brutally murder him and add his scalp to the growing pile? But you already know the answer, because he enjoys it, further reinforcing his earlier ideas in the proper raising of a child in hope of man discovering his true capabilities. There is another reason why the judge kept the young Mexican boy around, but it's just not quite the time to mention that right now. Put a pin in it for later. In retaliation of the gang's slaughter of the Apache village, a strong force of Apache Indians chased the Glanton gang tirelessly while shooting arrows, following them through towns and haciendas before eventually losing sight of the gang and giving up the chase. The gang quite cleverly removed the shoes from their horses to remove any tracks for the Apaches to follow, and it works except for the mighty trail of bloodshed left in their wake in the chase. The gang survives and returns to Chihuahua City on the 21st of July 1829, greeted as heroes as they come to the governor to cash in 128 scalps and 8 heads, which returns a hell of a lot of money. The governor throws the gang a celebratory dinner, and the gang remained restlessly quiet and bored until the money arrives, to which Glanton quickly interrupts the governor and takes over proceedings, using his knife to dish out each coin fairly amongst his men. And now that the job is done and the money has arrived, it's time to party like it's 1829. Except only the Glanton gang seem to be the ones having any fun at this party, as they very quickly turn the city into a debaucherous pit of drunken stupidity. There's fighting, shouting, shooting, grabbing, groping of women, with some even being stolen from husbands, and much worse, they completely trash the place across a several-day bender, eventually getting it all out of their system and rounding up to head back out for more scalps. They arrived as heroes, but now they leave without any fuss or clamour at all. In fact, the people of Chihuahua City were quietly glad to see the back of them. After a fair ride, the gang soon stop at a Mercury cantina, and the atmosphere is immediately hostile upon their arrival, with a Mexican gang in the corner making remarks about them in Spanish. But it is a passing Mexican funeral that lights the fuse, as an exploding firework from the parade makes the men in the bar skittish. Grimly gets stabbed by one of the Mexican men, with the judge quickly shooting the Mexican assailant through the head in return. Guns are quickly drawn and shots are fired. Out of nowhere, the Glanton gang are shooting at the very people they are paid to protect. There's a small detail in this section here that I think is amazing. I love that McCarthy mentions the reaction of the horses outside, that the Mexican horses buck and run at the explosions while the American horses just continue to graze casually, completely desensitized to the commotion. The same animal of the same nature in the same lands, completely altered by man's violent impacts on the world, both in a reaction of innate natural fear and eventual trained conformity. As the gang makes their way out of the cantina and into the street, the judge is described as terrifyingly picking up a Mexican man by his head and lifting off the ground and crushing his skull, dropping him on the floor, and blood poured out of his ears as the judge moved on and continued on with the fight. I think it's kind of important that McCarthy mentions that so that you can't make any mistakes about the judge here, because obviously he was fighting back, actually. It wasn't him that started it for once, actually. He just responded to the Mexicans shooting one of his men. But now he's going out of his way to really violently murder someone in quite an excruciating way. So don't get it twisted. The judge wasn't just having his friends back. It's not like he didn't want this to happen. Oh no. No, he's loving this right now. He's absolutely in his element. And after opening fire on the men that they are sworn to protect, the gang are left with two options. They can cut and run and go into hiding, or they can kill every last man, woman and child until there aren't any witnesses left to speak of this atrocity. Take a long, hard guess at which one they went for. That's right, they slaughter everyone in sight, taking their scalps in the process, some being dragged away from shrines and altars that they prayed at before being scalped alive. As mentioned before with Juan Miguel, Glanton recognises that there really isn't a way to tell the difference between a Mexican and a native scalp, so after massacring all of these innocent Mexican civilians, Glanton's despicable plan is to return to Chihuahua City and scam them with the scalps of their fellow people for another hefty payday and another bender. I can't help but find that brilliantly planted by McCarthy. It never said outright as to when Glanton started thinking about playing it fast and loose with the real nationality of the scalps. He is an awful man, though. I would imagine that lying to get what he wanted would come quite easily to him. The judge even preempted that Glanton would lie about one of those severed heads being the head of Gomez. That's how likely he is to just say whatever to get what he needs. Back then, it's not like they had CCTV or anything. It was mostly his word against theirs. And he's quite scary and intimidating, and, you know, if you go up against him, you'll probably pay the price for it one way or another, so maybe just let him get on with it. So they did, and he got away with it a lot of times. But whereas McGill's scalp being chucked into the pile was very clearly a testing of the water to see if they could get away with it, and if they did get caught, they could claim plausible deniability, can't help but think that very quiet and unspoken psychology of Glanton is thinking, why not take advantage of these idiots? It makes no difference to him, and in fact makes his work an awful lot easier. Terrified and tearful innocent Mexican civilians don't pose the same threat that armed and deadly waves of native Indians do. It also serves as an understanding of why the judge perhaps attached himself to Glanton in particular, because he regularly shows that his mindset really isn't too far removed from the judge's own beliefs. Glanton delivers it all in a more clunky, thoughtless sense of greed and selfishness compared to the judge's far more philosophical approach. But at the end of the day, they do align. Despite being the leader, Glanton isn't going to see an issue with the judge's teachings to his men. How can he? He practically lives by them already. And it's not that Glanton isn't smart enough to notice, it's that he's so selfishly ingrained in his lust and greed that he doesn't care. As long as Glanton gets what he wants, it doesn't matter. We do see these minuscule moments in Blood Meridian to suggest an odd sense of caring nature from Glanton, but it's often quite surface level or performative. He always eats and drinks with his men at the table and shares out every coin equally to his men as well. It is also mentioned in a passing sentence that he often thinks of his wife and child that he hasn't seen in years and will never see again. But that's all. If there is a good man somewhere inside of Glanton, it's been reduced and shut out to the minutest pinch of an existence, suffocated by a bloodthirsty, greedy, dominating animal. Without any question, the gang go along with Glanton's awful scam. They return to Chihuahua City fairly quickly, cash in again for these new scalps, emptying the governor's coffers as they hadn't nearly replenished in time since their last deal. But this time, the gang seem pretty quick to head off and get moving again, and with good reason, as the governor soon realises he's been scammed and handed hundreds of Mexican scalps. Furious and betrayed, the governor issues a bounty for the head of John Joel Glanton. The gang rest up in a nearby Mexican town on the day of the Las Animas Festival celebrations. Las Animas, also known as the Festival of Souls, is a Mexican celebration attached to the infamous De los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, where it is believed and celebrated that the dead return to the living for a short while. The judge is described as being solemn and away from the festivities before eventually sitting alone on a doorstep and offering out candies to the passing children who are all wary and skittish of the enormous and mysterious man. Except for one child, it seems, as later that day a young girl has gone missing and is later found brutally murdered. Once again, the judge is so frustrated by the order and respect of civility that he goes out of his way to deliver behaviour that spits in the face of these celebrated traditions and spoils it for everyone, almost offering his own twisted ritual or sacrifice to counter and nullify the traditions. Next year, when they come to celebrate this festival again, they will all be haunted and reminded of what happened to that young girl. The judge has tainted it for them. Without saying it out loud, the judge is trying to change and manipulate these people into his point of view with his own horrific actions, all whilst actively living by this horrific ideology that he so believes in. The judge also finds a young Mexican boy with several puppies in arm who is trying to sell them for a cheap price. The judge offers a hefty price to the boy, far more money than the pups were worth, even without the boy's desperate discount. And the boy trades his puppies for a few coins from the judge, which leads to one of the toughest portions in the book, where the judge, with a big smile on his face, decides to throw them off a bridge into a river and gleefully watches them sink, if you will. At this time, Bathcat just so happened to be urinating in that river, and the splash startled him enough to draw his pistols. Upon seeing the struggling pups, Bathcat shoots the dogs and puts them out of their misery, At least I hope it's to put them out of their misery, because Bathcat is quite an emotionally silent character throughout the book. He's very hardened by the things that he's done in his life, and he shows almost no response or emotion whatsoever to this current situation. He doesn't bring it up to the gang, he doesn't tell on the judge to the others, and he doesn't really hold the judge to account for it either. But is that out of fear? Is that out of respect? Or is that just out of his own total indifference? It's actually quite hard to say, to be sure, but he certainly doesn't laugh about it or revel in it, and I do think the fact that he shoots the dogs does suggest that he doesn't approve of it either. But when you're a man that used to hunt aborigines for sport, I suppose it is going to take quite a lot to really get something emotional out of you. And that is the very complicated morality of Bathcat. And the morality of most of these characters is incredibly twisted and warped. You are damn right I had to go home and give Frankie Boy the biggest of cuddles, because I was not okay after reading that part of the book. Toadvine, on the other hand, is furious about the puppy situation. He withdraws his pistol in a fit of rage and holds the barrel to the judge's head, lambasting his behaviour while the giant man sits calmly with a mocking grin. The judge eggs Toadvine on, telling him to pull the trigger now or put it away, somewhat calling his bluff. Toadvine angrily holsters his weapon and drops the subject. Toadvine has beaten up an old man and left him for dead in a fire, has stolen horses, and committed enough felonies to be branded for them, losing his ears in the process of some awful situation he no doubt found himself in at some point, and even regrouping with the kid in prison. And yet the puppies incident is what's crossing the line for Toadvine. It's interesting to see the inner workings of their minds on display, what they tell themselves to get to sleep at night, and the pick-and-choose moralities they hypocritically break themselves all of the time. With the bounty on his head and no plan yet figured out as to what to do next, Glanton begins to lose his purpose, going out of his way to start fights simply because he's bored. One morning he decides to take a Mexican flag and tie it to the tail of a donkey before walking that donkey up and down the local streets, which of course Mexican residents all saw and were very infuriated by. And of course it did not take them long to draw their pistols and start shooting at Glanton. But the gang are right there behind him and quickly run to his aid, returning fire on the Mexicans but realising they are actually quite outnumbered, and they're forced to make a run for it. The few members of the gang that get hit in the skirmish and are left behind by the gang are given the blessing of baptism by the Mexicans before they are killed, which initially I thought very little of, yet it stayed with me because McCarthy stops to tell us this despite the gang not actually being there to witness it. Foremost, it serves as a clear contrast to how the gang treated their captors by pulling them away from altars that they were praying at and scalping them alive. But on the other hand, it's not that far removed from what Captain White's army was planning to do and change the Mexican way of life. Because Catholicism reached Mexico from the early Spanish conquistadors of the 1500s, who came to plunder the land. This was not the original religion or traditions of Mexico. It's adopted or forced upon them by invaders of the past. And yet it has taken and rooted fully, replacing many of the old ways. The Mexicans might see it as right and pure, but do the recipients? And how did the Mexicans feel all those years ago when they were the recipients themselves? After this unnecessary shootout, the gang hit the road once more and start trailing up a mountain switchback, which is essentially this sort of thin, winding S-shaped road, usually going up and down a mountain. And on this mountain, the gang finds themselves crossing paths with a group of miners and their mules coming in the opposite direction of this very narrow path. Now, normally people would come to a halt and navigate a way around this, whether one at a time or one of the two parties heading back and finding a gap. What are you going to do? Well, you could do what the Glanton gang did, which is, just keep on going and ignore them entirely. Just sort of march at them, and if they don't get out the way, that's kind of their problem. Some of the miners draw their guns and shoot at Glanton, but the gang very quickly draw their guns and shoot back at them, forcing the remaining miners over the edge to join their friends. Now, I could be wrong here. I've gone very deep with some of this research, but I do feel like there is something a bit deeper at play here with this passage, and it becomes quite biblical. The miners and their mules happen to be carrying Mercury down a path, which does seem to be a metaphorical relation to the tree of life from early esoteric Judaism and Christianity. Christianity. The tree of life is a path with nodes upon it, like a ladder, if you will, with each node or step being equally balanced to maintain the whole path. It's essentially a map of existence where all must be perfectly balanced. But there is an equal idea from Kabbalistic beliefs called the breaking of the vessels, in which if any of these nodes were to break, it would bring about the fall of life itself. Many believing they have long since broken, explaining the existence of evil in the world that we live in today. What does this have to do with miners carrying mercury, I hear you ask? Well, mercury was used to extract the impurities of gold, so if you attach that to this wider biblical belief and how the Glanton gang respond to them, what you see is one group travelling the tree of life with a source that can remove impurity, being wiped off carelessly to their deaths by another group with the source of endless destruction, who continue to march on up that tree to their doomed ends. The gang's actions have forced the ladder to be no longer perfectly balanced, and the ladder is now set to break. A few days of travel later, and the gang find themselves getting close to the jungle, with the judge now taking the time to catalogue the creatures and insects that he finds, even capturing a few in jars to be studied later at the campfire, which he does. And this catches Toadvine's curiosity and brings about one of my favourite passages in the whole book. Anytime the judge gives a speech or lecture at the campfire, just buckle up because it's always something incredible coming. Toadvine sat watching him as he made his quotations in the ledger, holding the book towards the fire for the light, and he asked him, what was his purpose in all this? The judge's quill ceased its scratching. He looked at Toadvine, then he continued to write again. Toadvine spat into the fire. The judge wrote on, and then he folded the ledger shut and laid it to one side and pressed his hands together and passed them down over his nose and mouth and placed them palm down on his knees. Whatever exists, he said, whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. He looked about at the dark forest in which they were bivouacked. He nodded towards the specimens he'd collected. These anonymous creatures, he said, may seem little or nothing in the world, yet the smallest crumb can devour us. Any smallest thing beneath yon rock out of men's knowing, only nature can enslave man, and only when the existence of each last entity is routed out and made to stand naked before him will he be properly suzerain of the earth. What's a suzerain? A keeper or an overlord. Why not say keeper then? Because he is a special kind of keeper. A suzerain rules even where there are other rulers. His authority countermands local judgments. Toadvine spat. The judge placed his hands on the ground. He looked at his inquisitor. This is my claim, he said, and yet everywhere upon it are pockets of autonomous life. Autonomous. In order for it to be mine, nothing must be permitted to occur upon it, saved by my dispensation. Toadvine sat with his boots crossed before the fire. No man can acquaint himself with everything on this earth, he said. The judge tilted his great head. The man who believes that the secrets of the world are forever hidden lives in mystery and fear. Superstition will drag him down. The rain will erode the deeds of his life, but that man who sets himself the task of singling out the thread of order from the tapestry will, by the decision alone, have taken charge of the world, and it is only by such taking charge that he will effect a way to dictate the terms of his own fate. I don't see what that has to do with catching birds. The freedom of birds is an insult to me. I'd have them all in zoos. That would be a hell of a zoo. The judge smiled. Yes, he said. Even so. What Judge Holden says here is nuts. It blew my mind when I first read it, and it still does now. This is all relating to everything we've seen so far with the judge. Gnosticism in particular, and showing the initiative to garner knowledge and in turn gain power and control from said knowledge. But also the importance of survival and your lasting legacy. To not be restrained by these frozen gods and go further than the greats that fell before you, and not end up like the Anasazi or the Ozymandias poem. The judge is stating that knowledge is power, and rather than praying to a god to be all-knowing, the judge actively pursues such knowledge with direct action, dictating and deciding himself what things may be, standing truthfully bare to become a suzerain or overlord of this very world that he makes claim of. He would have birds in cages oppressing their flight and freedom until the creature has altered its mindset into no longer wanting to fly or even feeling capable of doing so. He wishes to be a suzerain, a ruler above rulers, which I suppose many would consider a god. He even goes as far as to place his hand on the earth and call it his claim, and that for it to be his, whatever happens upon it must be by his call and his call alone. Complete control over absolutely everything. What I find most haunting about this speech is that the judge is also talking about the gang members too. Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. That means you too. He's quite boldly saying to their faces that you exist because I allow it. The judge is sort of laying his cards on the table to the gang here and letting them in on what's really going on in that terrifying head of his, all while still trying to allure the gang into those ideals and presenting his potential madness as sound of mind and reasonably gauged, which it is somewhat taken as, if not fully agreed with by all of the gang members, before continuing on with their evening. The gang's atrocious scam on Chihuahua City begins to catch up with them as they suddenly find themselves under fire and chased by Mexican officials that are led by General Elias. Both sides take casualties, and in a moment of respite with the Mexican soldiers soon to be catching up with them, the Glanton gang take a moment to rip up bits of cloth at different lengths and essentially draw straws, or cloths if you will, to decide who will stay behind and give mercy to the wounded, rather than leave them to the assumed savagery of the Mexicans. Upon the kid's turn to draw, he decides upon a cloth until he notices the judge staring at him unsettlingly from afar. The kid changes his mind, pulling out another cloth, and of course, it's one of the short ones. When the kid looks back at the judge, he is now deep in conversation and paying the kid no mind at all, as if his horrible stare was simply innocuous. But the trend that we have seen so far would suggest that this is the judge again somehow tampering with fortunes and fate once more. The gang gather up their belongings and get moving again before the Mexicans get too hot on their tails, leaving behind both the kid and Sam Tate, who was the other member of the gang to draw the short cloth. There are 4 men who are gravely wounded, 2 of which are Delaware Indians. One is a new Mexican recruit who had only been with the gang for a very short while, and Dick Shelby, an American who had ridden with the gang for quite some time now. The last living Delaware Indian also momentarily stays behind with the kid and Tate, as he mercy kills his 2 friends in an appropriate and respectable manner of their culture, before riding on alone to catch up with the gang. The kid and Tate stall and deliberate as to how to go about this, not wanting to kill people they consider friends, but also not wanting to leave them to untold torture from the enemy, or even the wildlife, all with their own fear of being caught up by the enemy themselves, or that Glanton may even return and kill them for not obeying orders. But the kid holds his ground and sees out his duty despite Tate's testing comments about just catching up with the gang and lying about having done the job. He tells Tate to go on and catch up with the gang, which Tate does, leaving the kid to do the task alone. The Mexican recruit will die of his wounds very soon, so the kid focuses his efforts on Dick Shelby, who is very much conscious and in a great deal of pain as he suffers with a shattered hip and paralysation caused by an embedded bullet. The kid continues to delay, talking to Shelby and offering him comfort in these final moments, almost convincing Shelby to be calm and accepting of his fate as he answers his panicked and fevered questions bluntly and honestly, which is just kind of how the kid is in the few moments that he does speak. He is extremely matter-of-fact. Despite trying to convince Shelby that there's no point and nowhere to hide him from the enemy, the kid tries to move Shelby anyway and calm his pleas. But the kid quickly drops Shelby when he feels the injured man reaching for his gun. But the kid still doesn't give up on Shelby. Not entirely. Without a word, he simply returns to the doomed man and fills his flask with water before riding on to catch up with Tate just a short ride ahead. He tries to help and bring peace to Shelby just as he did with Juan Miguel, but isn't this all too little too late and a bit retroactive? And even in his help, that matter-of-fact nature of his still rings true throughout. As the tarot card suggested, the kid is still lost and without anything better to do. The kid hasn't suddenly gained a guilty conscience and wants to make everything better again. He's just trying to do right by someone in a bad situation because, similarly to his approach to the violence, why not? This is where the kid differs to the judge. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the judge would have gladly killed these wounded men. He'd probably have made them suffer and he would have really enjoyed it and taken his time and got the most out of it. The kid isn't there. He isn't that. He's without aim and quickly falling into the normality of violence in his environment and company that he keeps, but he's not religiously betrothed to the idea in some philosophical manner. It's just where he's landed and they're the cards that he's been dealt. and there's nothing else out there for him. And with this idea that the judge is perhaps manipulating situations and scenarios to occur, like that uneasy stare that he gave the kid to make him change his mind and pull the damning cloth, I can't help but wonder if this is the judge testing the kid. We know from the judge's speech earlier that the kid is practically the ideal candidate or image of what the judge believes to be the truest, most accomplished form of man. But is the kid really all in when it comes down to it? We know that the kid is capable of violence. We've witnessed it many times through the book. And yet, in the most heinous acts in the book, the kid is never directly described as committing those acts. McCarthy somehow manages to cleverly and subliminally evoke the notion that the kid isn't there in these heinous moments. I mean, I certainly never pictured him when those scenes were going down. And yet the kid is there. He's present for all of it. And sure, I think it's fair to say he probably took his fair share in scalps and corpses too, considering it's the very business of the gang that he's a member of. And it's all down to how brilliantly and purposely that McCarthy has crafted these moments with very precise wording. Sometimes he doesn't focus on any characters at all while this is going down. It's more of a blur and more of this epically horrible, masochistic, biblical paragraph of sheer terror. The judge is shown to perform awful deeds, as is Glanton, Toadvine, and Davy Brown as well. But the kid, not really, not while he's with the gang. And yet this is the very same kid that did have those sporadic, aimless spurts of violence committed on his way to the gang. But it is in these weird moments of mercy and kindness that we know that the kid is still holding on to some sense of what we would call morality. That's what makes the kid so difficult to understand, because on one hand he is presented with this youthful innocence, that he knows no better, that all of this trouble he gets into is all out of boredom and anger and frustration, and he just needs someone to put their arm around him and point him in the right direction and give him some purpose. Whereas on the other hand, we have seen him be outright nasty and violent. He had a fight simply because he didn't want to stand in the mud. He bottled someone because they didn't want to serve him alcohol. He's robbed people, most likely killed and scalped people, now being a Glanton gang member, but at least he does do it with an open sense of honesty, rather than twisting and warping it into some sort of meaning of, oh, I only did it because of this, I'm still a good guy. No, I think the kid still sees it bluntly as it is. He is exceptionally matter-of-fact in his words, and I think he is with his beliefs as well. I've really rambled for a while there. I hope I didn't lose any of you. Let's get back on track with the narrative. The kid manages to catch up with Tate, whose horse is hobbling due to its shoes having been removed earlier on when chased by the Mexican army. The kid once again refuses to leave Tate behind, and they keep moving the best they can towards the cold of the Sonoran Mountains. They make it to the mountainous range as snow begins to fall at night, with the exhausted pair eventually resting in the cold, but the night's sleep is soon disturbed as the kid wakes to rustling and finds Mexicans closing in on them. The kid bursts out of the heavy blanket of snow that had mounted upon him and grabs his rifle, firing into the darkness before frantically grabbing his boots and rolling down a slope and sprinting away aimlessly whilst dressing himself. It is through his panicked and racing breaths that the kid hears a gunshot echo far behind him, assumedly being the end of Sam Tate. The kid keeps moving, exhausted and freezing cold in the hard mountains, unsure of where his pursuers had gotten to, yet in some miraculous moment, the kid sees a burning tree in the distance and approaches. It was a lone tree, burning on the desert, a heraldic tree that the passing storm had left afire. The solitary pilgrim drawn up before it had travelled far to be here, and he knelt in the hot sand and held his numbed hands out while all about in that circle attended companies of lesser auxiliaries rooted forth in the inordinate day. Small owls that crouched silently and stood from foot to foot, and tarantulas and salpugas, and vinegaroons, and the vicious mygale spiders and beaded lizards with mouths black as chow dogs, deadly to man, and the little desert basilisks that jet blood from their eyes, and the small sand vipers like seemly gods, silent and the same, in Jeddah, in Babylon. A constellation of ignited eyes that edged the ring of light, all bound in precarious truce before this torch whose brightness had set back the stars in their their sockets. This, of course, draws biblical references to Moses and the burning bush, but also to Tobin's speech about God speaking in the least of creatures, and the silence is what brings every man to attention when it is no longer there. What I believe we are seeing here is the kid being offered a spiritual awakening, if you will. If there is a God in the world of Blood Meridian, this is him offering the kid a way out. He could go start fresh, maybe find himself a good woman and chalk it all up to youthful stupidity. But he doesn't. Much like his inverted tarot card suggested about turning a blind eye to the best options in front of him, the kid sticks to his honour and returns to the gang. Admittedly, that could be partly out of fear, considering if you run from the gang, they'll just come looking for you. But realistically, in this situation, they could just believe him to be dead. And with so many enemies on their tail chasing them, is it worth it? But he sticks to his principles. He goes back to the gang. And when he gets there, he finds that the gang are in pretty bad shape, having been pursued once more in the kid's absence. When he returns, he finds them in the process of burning all of the scalps in a large pile, which must have absolutely reeked. The plan was a failure, and the scalps are of no use to them anymore. They just serve as evidence that they are, in fact, the wanted Glanton gang. And frankly, they could really do with some allies right now, and nobody is going to want to do business with these bloodied wanted men carrying hundreds of rotting illegal scalps. So Glanton sends out a small scouting party to look out up ahead before the gang leave the scouts behind and look to negotiate with local Indians in the area. But it isn't long before they eventually stumble upon the corpses of their scouting party, hung upside down with bamboo through their feet and their brains slowly cooking over a fire. One of those corpses was Bathcat, and as prophesied by the author himself, his tattoo was on full display as Toadvine remorsefully cut down his desecrated corpse. The last of the Delaware Indians is also among the dead, which finishes the metaphor that I personally believe that their presence in the story is there to represent. Again, tying into that hypocrisy of war, these Delaware Indians regularly obey their old cultures whilst also obeying the cultures of the gang too, in simply being a part of it. Like the judge said about the Anasazi, these legends fall and become simply legend. Despite the Delaware Indians still existing to this day, I believe McCarthy is trying to reinforce that idea by having us spend time with these men of a different language, culture, lifestyle and belief, and being inquisitive and curious about these aspects and the mysticism of higher powers potentially, what seems attached to it anyway, only for them to die and become nothing more than a memory to the gang, a memory that will probably fade. In the end, their beliefs didn't save them, didn't separate them from the rest, whether it be by bear attack or sickening torture. They're gone, just like Bathcat, a man who hunted the natives of his own land. Despite their vast differences, in the end, nothing separated them. The gang keep moving, approaching a hideout and sending men in with gunshots soon following. Of course. The gang enter the hideout to find two men, one hit and speaking a foreign language and pointing to the sky before dying. The other gets dragged out before them and speaks the same foreign language. Luckily, the judge recognises the language and begins to converse with him in German. He hears the man's story and discovers that the other dead man was his brother, and they are just weary travellers seeking refuge, having fled Germany in the recent years, with their homeland struggling financially at this time. There isn't anything that can be done for the men, and so the gang leave. Glanton seemingly annoyed about the whole ordeal, stating that he doesn't like to see white men that way, German or not. Not long after that, the gang soon reach an Apache town with hopes of profitable negotiation, but it starts poorly when Glanton's horse bites the Apache leader's horse on the ear and draws a lot of blood. Glanton's horse has become so ingrained in the violence that its rider so frequently delivers that the animal naturally thinks to lash out at what it has come to learn to be the enemy. Another example of man's quaking after effects of violence and its reshaping of true nature of a living thing. It resonates so strongly with the judge's ideals of caged birds in zoos, reshaping them until they no longer fly and are of his control. Thankfully, the judge manages to cool things down between the two sides, claiming it to be a simple freak accident, that the horse has always been a little bit on the wild side. The gang mean no harm and they simply seek business, which seems seems to be enough to settle any animosity between the Apaches and the Glanton gang. And it is soon agreed that the Apaches will give the gang gold in return for whiskey. The gang doesn't currently have any whiskey, but they have said that in 3 days they will return from Tucson, Arizona with plenty, and the Apaches accept on good faith. So the gang does exactly that. They ride on to Tucson, Arizona, and while most members of the gang settle in for a drink, Glanton and the judge take some time to get some new recruits, considering the woeful state the gang has fallen into. A passerby suggests that they go see the idiot and his brother, which they do, finding a man who keeps a scrawny and feral beast of a man inside of a cage eating his own feces. Glanton and the judge offer them passage for money, which they agree, before Glanton asks, "You let women see that thing?" Just like the German brothers before, this is all just more insight into Glanton's bizarrely twisted moral compass. The heinous, worst things from hell that he wouldn't bat an eye at, and yet these very simple, understandable, well, a guy's got to live sort of situations where he is absolutely repugnant to it. While they're in Arizona, a barman refuses to serve Black Jackson unless he moves. And of course, he doesn't, and the gang mock the barman, serving around him instead. Davy Brown throws the barman a gun and encourages him to kill Black Jackson, mockingly. But of course, Black Jackson draws his gun quicker, shoots the barman to loud hollers and whistles. The gang get up and move on to a different bar to continue their drinking, with a policeman soon showing up and trying to arrest Glanton for the murder of the barman. Glanton just gaslights his way out of it. Basically says, "Wasn't us," and they get away with it. There was no CCTV back then, and it's basically their word against his. And to be honest, one policeman against the entirety of the Glanton gang, who are extremely violent and armed and have supposedly just killed a man. Are you going to go in there and wrangle up all those maniacs, or are you just going to go home and continue your life? But the gang regroup. They move on from the trouble and settle down for the night with a drink, with several passing women being mortified by the sight of the idiot. The women scold the idiot's brother and treat the caged man with care, bathing him and finding out that his real name is James. It shows a severe contrast between the men and the women of this world. Where the men are destructive and reckless, the women are loving and caring. They are very much the healers in the aftermath of men's destruction. But I also think the bathing of the idiot could be a metaphorical baptism, if you will, a reawakening for the idiot to now become James. It seems like this supposed god again offering another out potentially to one of the characters. It goes on to say that the idiot danced happily through the night, and when all were asleep, the idiot entered the lake once more. His mental debilitation and inability to speak means we never know what the idiot is thinking or how capable of thought he really is, but his behaviour here speaks volumes. The only problem is he can't swim, and he starts panicking and drowning, and likely worried further by a completely nude judge now appearing before him on the bank, smiling and reaching out with a rescuing hand. We already have this idea that the judge is some sort of representation of the devil in the story, and that the idiot has just been metaphorically baptised and given a new lease of joyous life. And the one character that we know for a fact who would take great umbrage with that just so happens to be there in the late of night, in the nude, ready and waiting to save him from that joy that is now killing him. The gang recoup the whiskey for their deal, but they just can't help themselves. They pour out the whiskey from the barrel for themselves and fill a small sack with whiskey before attaching the sack to the inside of the barrel's tap and filling up the rest of the barrel with water. So the barrel will be heavy and it will feel like it's full, but really they're getting maybe 1 bottle's worth of whiskey in total. They return to the Indians and give them the rigged barrel of whiskey in exchange for gold before moving on once more, settling down at the campfire where Glanton sits away from the gang, seemingly lost and lifeless as he stares into the fire. It says that those with him now aren't who he started with, whilst the judge speaks to the rest of the gang about the strangeness of life when overhearing 2 of the men discussing if there was life on other planets in the sky. The truth about the world, he said, is that anything is possible. Had you not seen it all from birth and thereby bled it of its strangeness, it would appear to you for what it is. A hat trick in a medicine show, a fevered dream, a trance bepopulate with chimeras having neither analogue nor precedent, an itinerant carnival, a migratory tent show whose ultimate destination, after many a pitch in many a muddle field, is unspeakable and calamitous beyond reckoning. The universe is no narrow thing, and the order with it is not constrained by any latitude of its conception to repeat what exists in one part in any other part. Even in this world, more things exist without our knowledge than with it, and the order in creation which you see is that which you have put there, like a string in a maze, so that you shall not lose your way. For existence has its own order, and that no man's mind can compass, that mind itself being but a fact among others. Davy Brown spat into the fire. "That's some more of your craziness," he said. The judge smiled. He placed the palms of his hands upon his chest and breathed in the night air, and he stepped closer and squatted and held up one hand. He turned that hand, and there was a gold coin between his fingers. "Where is the coin, Davy? I'll notify you where to put that coin." The judge swung his hand, and the coin winked overhead in the firelight. It must have been fastened to some subtle lead, horsehair perhaps, for it circled the fire and returned to the judge, and he caught it in his hand and smiled. "The arc of the circling bodies is determined by the length of their tether," said the judge. "Moons, coins, men." His hands moved as if they were pulling something from one fist in a series of elongations. "Watch the coin, Davy," he said. He flung it, and it cut an arc through the firelight and was gone in the darkness beyond. They watched the night where it had vanished, and they watched the judge, and in their watching, some the one, some the other, they were a common witness. "The coin, Davy, the coin," whispered the judge. He sat erect and raised his hands and smiled all around. Again, the judge reinforces those ideas of abolishing that subconscious self-restriction, that these questions are stupid and irrelevant because it's all right here in front of you. The only problem is you're not seeing it for what it is because you've all become accustomed to it. You've been accustomed to what you've been told it is. If you were dropped onto planet Earth right now, first time ever, you would be speechless. The sight of chewing gum on the street would completely baffle you. A dog barking would absolutely terrify you. The reason these things don't baffle us or scare us is because we're used to it. We know what it is. We've labelled it. And this is why the judge catalogues things. He gets to choose what it is and why. And in doing so, he has actually decided for all. Everything that we as an individual know is generally based on someone else's understanding of it. Every bit of information is regurgitated from somewhere, but wherever it spawned from is where the true power is. The judge doesn't believe in magic or aliens, it's just pure unfiltered chaos that we as a species allocate the order to, and the coin trick is very much a metaphorical representation of that. Humans are constricted by their morals and beliefs, much like the coin is by its tether. It'll spin round and round repetitively in small ineffectual circles, unless it breaks free and pushes itself beyond the boundaries to achieve the unthinkable, which we see with the coin seemingly zipping off into the bushes somewhere, whilst also remaining in the judge's hand, which leaves the gang stunned. Of course it does. They even get up and start looking for a second coin, and it's not to prove the judge wrong, but it's just out of sheer bewilderment of how the hell did he just do that. When you know how a magic trick is done, it loses its magic, just like humanity being used to the chaos of the world. And whilst the men are too fickle to see or understand and just start looking for the second coin, the judge is here doing it. Doing what they say can't be done. Doing whatever the hell frankly takes his fancy at any given moment. Because he is the coin that flew off yet remained. And while we're here, I will head straight to the next phenomenal lecture from the judge as he delivers a truly iconic speech about war. I'll start a little prior to the speech just to help set the scene in McCarthy's wonderful words. "They grew gaunted and lank under the white suns of those days, and their hollow burnt-out eyes were like those of noctambulants surprised by day. Crouched under their hats, they seemed fugitives on some grander scale, like beings for whom the sun hungered." Even the judge grew silent and speculative. He'd spoke of purging oneself of those things that lay claim to a man, but that body receiving his remarks counted themselves well done with any claims at all. They rode on, and the wind drove the fine grey dust before them, and they rode an army of greybeards, grey men, grey horses. The mountains to the north lay sunwise in corrugated folds, and the days were cool and the nights were cold, and they sat about the fire, each in his round of darkness in that round of dark, while the idiot watched from his cage at the edge of the light. The judge cracked with the back of an axe the shin bone on an antelope, and the hot marrow dripped smoking on the stones. They watched him. The subject was war. "The good book says that he that lives by the sword shall perish by the sword," said Black Jackson. The judge smiled, his face shining with grease. "What right man would have it any other way?" he said. "The good book does indeed count war and evil," said Irving, "yet there's many a bloody tale of war inside it." "It makes no difference what men think of war," said the judge. "War endures. As well ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way." He turned to Brown, from whom he'd heard some whispered slur or demurrer. "Ah, Davy," he said, "it is your own trade we honour here. Why not rather take a small bow? Let each acknowledge each." "My trade?" "Certainly. What is my trade?" "War. War is your trade, is it not?" "And it ain't yours?" "Mine too, very much so." "What about all them notebooks and bones and stuff?" "All other trades are contained in that of war." "Is that why war endures?" "No, it endures because young men love it, and old men love it in them. Those that fought, those that did not. That's your notion." The judge smiled. "Men are born for games, nothing else. Every child knows that play is nobler than work. He knows too that the worth or merit of a game is not inherent in the game itself, but rather in the value of what that game has put at hazard. Games of chance require a wager to have meaning at all. Games of sport involve the skill and strength of the opponent, and the humiliation of defeat and the pride of victory are in themselves sufficient stake, because they inhere in the worth of the principles and define them. But trial of chance or trial of worth, all games aspire to the condition of war, for here that which is wagered swallows game, player, all. Suppose two men at cards with nothing to wager save their lives. Who has not heard such a tale? A turn of the card. The whole universe for such a player has laboured clanking to this moment, which will tell if he is to die at that man's hand or that man at his. What more certain validation of a man's worth could there be? This enhancement of the game to its ultimate state admits no argument concerning the notion of fate. The selection of one man over another is a preference absolute and irrevocable, and it is a dull man indeed who could reckon so profound a decision without agency or significance either one. In such games as have for their stakes the annihilation of the defeated, the decisions are quite clear. This man holding this particular arrangement of cards in his hand is thereby removed from existence. This is the nature of war, whose stake is at once the game and the authority and the justification. Seen so, war is the truest form of divination. It is the testing of one's will and the will of another within that larger will, which because it binds them is therefore forced to select. War is the ultimate game, because war is at last a forcing of the unity of existence. War is God. The judge is back on his bullshit, but this time he's just outright saying it. War is God. War is the one true religion for men to follow, for all of the reasons of which the judge has presented throughout the book and the behaviours enacted by the gang. That it is no mistake that men before them and men millions of miles away from them all have this inner calling to violence. It wasn't prearranged, and yet it's how we all respond, for it is who we are. But what's also interesting about this speech is seeing where the rest of the gang are with the judge's ideals. Black Jackson actually sounds like he could potentially be defending the judge's stance when we join the conversation, that even the Bible speaks prophetically and somewhat romantically about violence, which the judge blissfully agrees. Irving's response shows that he doesn't agree with that at all. He aims to correct the idea of Jackson's that although the Bible might depict violence, it certainly does not condone it, which the judge quickly shuts down, saying it doesn't even matter what men think of war anyway. So it mattered what Jackson thought of it because it correlated with the judge's ideas, but it doesn't matter what Irving thinks if it differs. The judge thinks he's so slick. And then there's Davy Brown, one of the most violent members of the group, who isn't even taking the conversation seriously, and is cussing and laughing under his breath at them all for participating in it. You'd think Davy would be on board with this notion of the judges, but far from it. He thinks the judge is crazy. Davy is fascinating in that sense because he is exactly what the judge is looking for in his idea of what man should be. And yet at the same time, he also isn't at all. In regard to violence and his abrasive bullying approach to others, where he takes what he wants and kills who he wants without a care or shred of morality involved, then sure, Davy Brown is absolutely the prime candidate for how the judge views the ideal man to be. Even in his refusal to believe or follow the judge's ideals, he does kind of, again, tick the judge's boxes, because it shows that Davy is thinking for himself and not just going along with what he's been told to do. But that's going to be a problem, because if he's not on board with the judge's mentality, then not only does that make him pretty hard to manipulate into following along, but it also essentially makes him a rival of the judge. Whether Davy realises he's doing it or not, he's kinda shutting down the judge's argument as being nothing other than crazy talk. That you can be as moralistically abhorrent as Davy Brown is without being religiously obsessed with the idea of that behaviour being the only way to be. It's deeply concerning that Davy Brown is the one speaking sense here. But none of this angers the judge. In fact, it makes him smile, and I believe that to be for one of two reasons. One being the fact I just mentioned, that this stand from Brown builds a potential rivalry which would inevitably lead to war and only make the judge's belief ring true. And secondly, I believe that the judge is amused by Davy's ignorance. Davy is the perfect ideal for the judge's beliefs, and yet Davy thinks it's nonsense. So what does that contradiction say about Davy? Either way you slice it, Davy Brown inherently proves the judge right, whether he likes it or not. The gang eventually find themselves at a ferry crossing on the Colorado River, where they are well met by Dr. Lincoln, who runs the ferry. Rather than just cross the river or change route, the gang of course devise an awful plan to reap the benefits of the innocence that they see before them. They decide to warn Doc Lincoln of a nearby Yuma tribe who are planning to attack at any minute, the gang offering to defend the ferry for free travel and payment, which Doc Lincoln agrees to, and the gang then move on down to the Yuma Indians and offer them military aid if they were to attack the ferry crossing in exchange for money, to which of course the Yumas agree. The gang play both sides and their evil plan works a charm. The Yuma Indians attack the ferry, and with a giant howitzer cannon at the ready, the gang betrays the attacking Indians and open fire, massacring many and infuriating the remaining Yuma Indians that fled for their survival. Again, it is mentioned that the gang scalp the wounded Yumas. It really shows the savagery of the gang. There's no deal waiting for these scalps. They serve them no purpose at all. Whether it's to send a message of dominance and fear to the Yumas, or my preferred line of disturbed thinking, just sheer muscle memory and animalistic habit. It's senselessly barbaric either way. With each time that it happens, you really do sense that the gang is lost and cannot be saved from themselves. But this massacring does give the gang full control of the ferry and its crossing of the river, as Lincoln remorsefully and fearfully hides away in his office from here on. He's not the biggest character, Doc Lincoln, but his actions just make him another character that refuses to take their share of accountability. Not too dissimilar to the likes of Sproul, just less vocal, and understandably so. I think if Sproul was in the company of Davy Brown and such, he'd probably have kept his mouth shut and hid away too. The gang start quite reasonably with their ownership of the ferry, with just a slightly raised price for any customers, but it doesn't take long for their nastiness to seep in. Of course it doesn't. The ferry becomes a source of blind robbery, assault, and abuse for anyone who needs to cross or dare try build their own ferry and avoid using the one operated by the gang. But with that all being said, it is upon the capturing of the ferry that the gang do seem to settle down slightly. Well, settle down's probably the wrong word. They've become a little bit aimless, shall I say. They're not going anywhere. The scheme's working well, they're making money, so I guess this'll do for now. But it's mostly noted with Glanton that he seems somewhat stuck in the motion of it all. He has always been a man of few words and mostly of violence, but even now he seems more withdrawn than usual. He's described as being a dragon that collects gold upon gold, well beyond their needs and without any real purpose for it. Upon realising that they're running low, Glanton sends Toadvine, Brown and Webster to San Diego for more building supplies. The trio make their way into San Diego and order the supplies and spend the rest of the booze getting absolutely hammered, with Toadvine and Webster waking up the next morning in jail with no memory of how they got there or where the hell Brown went. Brown is in a hurried state and trying to find the other two men. He finds himself a pretty nice shotgun that he wants to turn into a sawn-off. So he goes to a farrier and he asks for it to be cut, but he is refused due to it being such a fine weapon that is clearly not meant to be damaged or altered in any such way. Which of course just pisses Davy Brown off. He threatens the farrier, so much so that the farrier gets the police, and in his absence, Davy Brown jumps the counter and starts cutting the shotgun himself. When the farrier returns with the police, Davy Brown doesn't even deny it. And of course, nothing comes of it. Because are you going to confront Davy Brown, who by the way is holding a sawn-off shotgun right now? I didn't think so. But thankfully, the sawn-off isn't needed, as Toadvine and Webster manage to pay their way out of jail, and to celebrate, the trio reunite and get hammered once again. Only this time, I assume in some sort of mockery towards his encounter with the police earlier that day, Brown thinks it would be funny to pour aguardiente on a police officer and set him ablaze with the end of his cigar. Which he does, and it's a really horrifying part of the book. And it rightly ends with Brown being thrown in jail this time. I should also briefly mention that in this time it is stated that Brown has Bathcat's necklace of ears. It's changed hands a few times, and sometimes without that deep of mention or explanation. But it's not too hard to believe that amongst a few drinks, Brown might have asked Toadvine to wear it, or maybe even won it off him in cards. But it is interesting how this awful, disgusting thing, not even of the violence that these men commit in these lands, yet it's treated as such a fond memento by a fair few members of the gang. Back at the crossing, Toadvine and Webster return and inform Glanton that Brown has been arrested in San Diego. And Glanton is very quick to mount his horse with a few good men and go and find him, leaving the judge in charge of the crossing while he's away. As Glanton rides out to San Diego, he doesn't realise that Davy Brown has already bribed a guard to set him free, only to then kill that guard with an unknowing bullet to the back of the head once they are out of the prison. But Glanton continues his search for Brown nonetheless, only realising that he has escaped after capturing and torturing the alcalde of San Diego, who tells him to go and check the cell, that they won't find anyone there. Glanton checks and realises that the alcalde is telling the truth, letting him go and slowly making their return to the ferry settlement. After a dreary journey, Glanton returns to the gang's settlement in the late of night, with Lincoln rushing out to him fearfully yelling, "That man, that man," whilst pointing up at the silhouette of the judge standing on the mountains, performing some sort of ritual with Jackson, both in thin garb, with the judge being described as a great archimandrite, which if you don't know is a high-ranking priest, usually the abbot of a monastery. Priest of priests, if you will. The settlement has turned into a living hell. The gang members run riot while the judge has innocent civilians stripped naked, chained and treated barbarically. Glanton says nothing. He simply observes for a moment before returning to his quarters and resting for the night. In the dark of that night, as the gang are fast asleep, the Yuma Indians now take their revenge for the betrayal at the ferry crossing, sweeping into their settlement and slaughtering the Glanton gang in large number. Black Jackson is the first to be killed, hit with several arrows on the riverbank shortly after seeing a coin. Perhaps the same coin that the judge was performing tricks with at the campfire. It seems almost fitting for Black Jackson that the charade he had fallen so deeply for seems to start to unravel just as his end comes. And once again the tarot cards are ringing true, for it was said that the fate of the gang resides in the fate of Black Jackson. The leader of the Yuma tribe storms into Glanton's room, still mounted upon his horse, the animal even climbing into the bed of which Glanton slept within. Glanton sat up and smiled, racially insulting the Yuma Indian leader as he tells him to hack away, to which the Yuma Indian leader obliged, swinging a tomahawk axe straight down onto Glanton's head and killing the leader of the gang. This is what I believe Glanton's tarot card reading was referring to, A wheelless cart on the river could well be a ferry, and a carriage of the dead could well be the fateful confirmation of the gang's death upon taking that ferry. Only 5 members of the Glanton gang survived the attack, that being the Kid, Toadvine, Davy Brown, Tobin, and the judge. 6 members if you include the idiot. Davy Brown wasn't there. He's still making his way back, whilst Tobin, the Kid, and Toadvine all fled and scattered from the attack, all being exceptionally wary of the judge, who very interestingly seemed to know that the Yumas were coming, for when the Yumas reached the judge's room, it is said he is found in the dark, completely nude, with the idiot and a young girl in there with him, who are also bare. And the judge is ready and waiting with that almighty howitzer cannon held under his arm and aimed at the door, whilst he held a lit cigar over the fuse. It's best not to think too long about what might have been going on in the judge's room that night, but the Indians run for it, absolutely terrified of the judge, who was last seen walking calmly out of the settlement, completely nude, and dragging that cannon along with him, quite easily with his enormous size and strength. It makes you wonder just what that ritual was all about before the attack. These rituals are always conveniently just before a slaughter or some manipulation of the judge. And not only was he described as an archimandrite, a faith higher than others with faith, it's Jackson who is the first to fall, as if he was the sacrifice, and was always going to be. It's almost as if somehow the judge has miraculously made it all fall into place, exactly as he wanted it to. Toadvine and the Kid lament in their misery and paranoia as they flee from the attack, with one eye consistently over their shoulder as they are eventually halted by the ensuing Indians, pair having to regularly fend them off every now and then as they keep on moving. They soon manage to regroup with Tobin, the ex-priest, who is also extremely sceptical of the judge, as he always has been, but the Indians continue with their advance, slowly but surely being picked off one by the Kid. So impressively, in fact, he single-handedly forces the Indians to retreat. Their loss is too high and his advance is too short to keep pursuing, giving the Kid, Toadvine and Tobin some desperately needed respite on the hot, dry plains. Soon enough, Judge Holden joins them, kept at some distance from the paranoid trio, despite his charming tongue and offers of large sums of money for simple necessities, like a hat to protect his bald head. And the judge's devious tongue works enough to sway Toadvine over to his side. For, frankly, Toadvine has absolutely nowhere else to go. The judge maintains his friendly demeanour to the group, and giving them no reason to be fearful of him, as he simply moves on in the desert plains with Toadvine cautiously joining the giant man and leaving the Kid and Toadvine in the sandy dunes. Not long after, Davy Brown rides up to the Kid and Tobin, asking questions about the gang and what exactly happened while he was away. He asks if they saw Glanton die for sure, and seems wary when asking which direction the judge went in, before eventually riding off alone now that there is no gang for him to return to. As the Kid and Tobin move forward slowly, they soon find themselves being fired at once more, but this time by none other than Judge Holden himself, returning on horseback and firing at the two as he quickly approached. A cat and mouse chase through the desert persists as the judge toys with the Kid, calling him a friend and asking for him to join him, forgiving the Kid of his actions and blaming Tobin, the old priest, for leading him wayward. The judge even offers protection against fictional crimes committed by the Kid that the judge has quickly concocted on his manipulative tongue. He also confirms that Toadvine and Davy Brown are safe and well, despite wearing their garments and seeing no sign of them. But the judge's persuasions are ignored, and the Kid and Tobin remain hidden. Tobin builds a crucifix to distract the judge, preaching religiously as the judge turns and approaches with his rifle in hand. He takes aim and fires, flooring the ex-priest who is left bleeding on the ground. The Kid fires back at the judge, but misses, rushing to be with Tobin as he bleeds out in the desert. The ex-priest tells the Kid to kill the horses and remove any form of transport or escape for the judge, to kill him and end it all here and now. The Kid takes some convincing, but eventually agrees, managing to kill the horses and hiding nervously as he sneaks around the judge and returns to Tobin. The two quietly set off in the night, slipping away from the judge for some short respite, only to see him coming after them once more just 2 days later, this time under the shade of an umbrella that he had constructed from desert bones and carcasses, whilst leisurely walking the idiot on a leash like a dog. Quite an image that has really stayed with me since reading it. The Kid and Tobin keep moving, and with a sweeping wind blowing away their footprints, the two decide to hide in a dugout cavern and watch quietly as the judge strolls right on by between the kid's crosshairs, and yet he doesn't fire. Tobin tells the kid he won't have a chance to kill the judge again. The kid and Tobin eventually find themselves getting rescued by a local tribe of Indians, who feed them and give them temporary treatment and fixes for their severe wounds. The two leave the Indian tribe and head over a mountain ridge into a local town. Tobin seeks help for his wounds whilst the kid seeks a drink in the local bar. But he doesn't get very far when a group of guards arrive and arrest the kid, quickly throwing him in jail. The kid is visited by the judge in his cell. He tells him that Tobin has gone completely mad and that the authorities intend to hang the kid, especially now that the judge has confessed and told them that the kid was solely responsible for the crimes of the gang. The judge also seems to try and physically entice the kid here too, asking him to come closer and that he would have treated him like a son. But the kid remains with his back against the far wall, boldly stating that he isn't afraid of the judge, which makes the enormous, terrifying man laugh. Yes, I think it's finally time to confess one small yet staggering detail about the judge, which some of you may have already clocked onto, and that is the fact that he is a PDF file. Throughout the story, he has enticed children, kept their company, and killed many too. Glanton shook his head and spat when the judge asked about the young Mexican boy in the Presidio. Yeah, it was all right there, and the gang knew about it as well. And now he's making a move at the very aptly named kid. Remember how Tobin would try to keep the kid away from the judge on several occasions? Yeah, it wasn't just because he's big and scary. He's also a little hands-on, shall we say, and it's even more horrifying to know that in the true history found in Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession, A Recollection of a Rogue, it very much suggests it to be true of the real man as well, as Chamberlain writes about the gang finding a young nude girl dead one morning with large bruises that could only have been caused by the enormous man's hand. Sorry if that upsets you, but I just wanted to show where some of this might be coming from in the real history of the character. I think it's also a fair time to look into some of the lies of the judge. Because the thing is, the judge is actually quite alarmingly honest. He may change minute details to fit his agenda or back up his ideals, but I think you can find some depth in the small truths contained within the judge's lies. When we very first met him, he accused the Reverend of being a fake hiding behind religion, that he is a wanted man who is sexually complicit with children and animals. Take this with a pinch of salt, because I realise I'm potentially going off the dirt path here, but is there any chance that these could be somewhat applicable of the judge? He hides behind religion, and we know that he is complicit with those other activities. And of all the animals that it mentions, it specifies on a goat, which is, of course, an animal deeply rooted in Satanism. The details are fascinating in this book. It's so perfectly and precisely worded to entice you into thinking more and just constantly uncovering these endless riches that good literature should offer you. But anyway, back to the narrative. After laughing at the kid's refusal to come closer, the judge goes on to say, "You came forward," he said, "to take part in a work, but you were a witness against yourself. You sat in judgment on your own deeds. You put your allowances before the judgments of history, and you broke with the body of which you were pledged a part and poisoned it in all its enterprise. Hear me, man. I spoke in the desert for you only, and you turned a deaf ear to me. If war is not holy, man is nothing but antic clay. Even the cretin acted in good faith according to his parts, for it was required of no man to give more than he possessed, nor was any man's share compared to another's. Only each was called upon to empty out his heart into the common, and one did not. Can you tell me who that was?" "It was you," whispered the kid. "You were the one." The judge watched him through the bars. He shook his head. "What joins men together," he said, "is not the sharing of bread, but the sharing of enemies. But if I was your enemy, with whom would you have shared me? With whom? The priest? Where is he now? Look at me. Our animosities were formed and waiting before ever we two met. Yet even so you could have changed it all." "You," said the kid. "It was you." "It was never me," said the judge. "Listen to me. Do you think Glanton was a fool? Don't you know he'd have killed you?" "Lies," said the kid. "Lies, by God, lies." "Think again," said the judge. "He never took part in your craziness." The judge smiled. He took his watch from his waistcoat and opened it and held it to the failing light. "For even if you should have stood your ground," he said, "what ground was it?" He looked up, he pressed the case shut and restored the instrument to his person. "Time to be going. I have errands." After passing the buck onto the kid for the crimes of the Glanton gang, the judge is seemingly disappointed in the kid, asking him, even if he stood his ground, what ground would it be? The kid stands for nothing, just whatever suits him in the moment. The kid is satisfied enough with just existing. He seeks no legacy or proof of existence, while the judge expected more from him. For the kid to be more attached to any ideal, at least, if not the judge's. Alone and broken in his cell with the noose looming closer, the kid breaks and remorsefully confesses his crimes to the guard. He tells them of hidden gold and silver in the mountains that had been left behind when the gang were attacked by the Humours. 2 days later, assumedly after the guards went looking for that hidden gold and silver, the kid is released by the guards and baptised, released with a fresh start ahead. He first decides to look for Tobin, but he never finds him. And we, the readers, never hear about the ex-priest again. Perhaps there was some truth to the judge's lies once again. Perhaps the wounded ex-priest simply went mad in his dwindling years. And so, without purpose once more, the kid looks for it in the bottom of a whiskey bottle and finally seeks out surgery on an arrow shaft that has been stuck in his leg since the Humour attack. He knocks on the door and staggers through the entrance, but surgery is refused, at least until the kid sobers up. And for once, the kid obliges rather than retaliate. He actually does sober up and eventually receives the necessary surgery on his leg. Now resting and heavily etherized, the kid suffers with fever dreams, mostly about the judge, one of which stands out in particular. The judge smiled. The fool was no longer there, but another man, and this other man he could never see in his entirety, but he seemed an artisan and a worker in metal. The judge enshadowed him where he crouched at his trade, but he was a cold forger who worked with hammer and die, perhaps under some indictment and an exile from men's fires, hammering out like his own conjectural destiny all through the night of his becoming some coinage for a dawn that would not be. It is this false moneyer with his gravers and burins who seeks favour with the judge, and he is at contriving from cold slag brute in the crucible a face that will pass, an image that will render this residual species current in the markets where men barter. Of this is the judge, and the night does not end. To understand this dream, we can start with the simple presentation of a man who works with hammer and die, being forced out of his nature to do something tiresome and relentless for no gain of their own, except to seek favour from the judge. Which sounds a lot like the very toxic stranglehold that the judge had over some of the gang members. And it's not the first time that we've seen the judge be in relation to coins either, particularly with his trick that baffled the gang at the campfire when explaining the constraints and order we humans place upon ourselves. In that trick, it seemed that the judge only had one coin, at least until Black Jackson found another on the riverbank just moments before his death. And the false moneyer putting out coin after coin suggests there was more than one coin after all. It offers a suggestion that the judge really is just a conniving, scheming trickster after all. The judge's face being put upon the coins, of course, suggests a sense of ruling or kingship from the judge. Yet his rejection of the image reminds me so much of the gang's squabble over whether they wanted to be sketched into Judge Holden's notebook, and if that was to be the lasting image of them for history to discover. This is what the judge is judge of, and the night will not end. Because if the judge was ever to be satisfied with the coin, it would be finished. At the peak of its achievement, his meridian is at once his darkening and the evening of his day. To end it would be to give up control and have no further purpose. The judge can't stop. To stop is to fail. After recovering from his surgery and these horrible dreams, the kid all but destroys his self-image and starts new. He sells his pistols on the cheap as he continues to drink heavily to deal with his trauma. That is until he sees two men hung in the town square. And it's Toadvine and Davy Brown. It seems the judge wasn't lying. They were alive and well when he was hunting the kid and Tobin on the plains. The kid goes up to one of the guards and buys the necklace of ears that Davy Brown once wore, the kid wearing it himself as a memento of his time with the gang, before heading out alone in the Wild West. He searches for other members of the gang, but apart from himself and the judge, They were all gone. The kid's memories and the rotting necklace of ears around his neck is all that is left to suggest that any of it happened at all. Over the next few years, the kid grows into the man, still drinking heavily to numb the pain and blot out the memories, working odd jobs as protection for those seeking travel through dangerous lands. He carries a Bible with him that he cannot read, but the words he cannot interpret comfort him somehow in his attempts to become a better man. On one of these jobs, he witnesses an odd religious carnival of musicians marching through the plains, carrying crucifixes with someone dressed as a skeleton riding along in the back of the cart. Soon after, the kid discovers the wake of a bloodbath out in those isolated plains. He sees a decrepit woman hunkered down in the darkened cave. He speaks calmly to her in Spanish, offering her help and safe return home, only to realise that the woman has been dead for years, a fixed corpse of dust, long forgotten out in the middle of nowhere. Just so gutting and futile for the kid at this point. The religious carnival almost seems reminiscent of the gang itself, as death marches through deserts, but also of Glanton's tarot card with death upon a cart, and it ultimately leading to the end. It also rings true to many of the judge's teachings about war, that even out in this isolated spot of nothingness, blood has been spilt upon it, and the woman's aged corpse suggests that war was always here and always will be, no matter how hard the kid tries to hide from it. We will be referring to the kid as the man now, which is what happens in the book. The kid, now the man, crosses paths with a group of buffalo hunters, sharing jerky and water with them peacefully at the fire as they rest and share their stories. The thematic similarity here being that much like the Glanton gang or the Indians or the Mexicans, these buffalo hunters also hunt down a species, driving it to near extinction for their own gain and greed. Just as the judge said, all war is attained to these trades. But the man soon crosses paths with an older gentleman and two younger boys, who seem nice enough, they mean no trouble, except for the eldest of the two boys, named Elrod. He is a cocky, rambunctious little arsehole, to put it politely, and he consistently goads the man. Despite his companions telling Elrod not to and apologising deeply on the stupid boy's behalf, the man tolerates the trio until the night comes, and Elrod tries to his annoyances on the man once more. He attempts to steal the man's weapon while he sleeps, but the man wakes and kills Elrod effortlessly, saying, "You wouldn't have lived anyway." In the morning, the older gentleman and the remaining boy accept what happened to Elrod, somewhat understanding that he poked the bear and brought it upon himself. They use the occasion as a life lesson for the remaining boy to learn as they pick up Elrod's body and move on with their travels. In killing Elrod, the man is somewhat killing a representation of his younger self and his regrets. Elrod is very similar to the kid. He thinks he knows best, he thinks he's invincible, and he's frankly getting by on idle luck, and obliviously so. It's like the man is sparing Elrod from himself, from the true horrors that he will no doubt fall into in this world that this boy is so unaware of. In saying "you wouldn't have lived anyway," it's as if the man is justifying it, that he's doing Elrod a favour. Better the man kill him quickly now than let Elrod suffer from the hands of someone far worse. And yes, I asked you to put a pin in it a very long time ago now, but remember back on the very first page, after the kid ran away, we finished with the sentence, "All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man." Is it not coming full circle right here? Not only was the kid shaped by his father before him, bringing him to run away and seek more, but all that the kid/man has been through to this point, his history, is present to him now in the shape of Elrod. He sees the child, like we were asked to at the very beginning, and he chooses mercy for that child in the shape of death, rather than let him endure the hardships that he himself had to, in turn becoming the father of the man, having to create or become who he is now because of it. It also resonates with that odd moment back in the Mexican jail when the kid seemingly killed a child by throwing a rock at him. Remember how I said it could potentially be a disturbingly twisted metaphor for the kid killing his own self-image to grow into something more? A man, perhaps? Well, we're seeing that all unfold again here. Whereas back in the prison it was sheer retaliation without thought, with Elrod, it's very much considered, and that in itself shows growth in the man from his experience with the gang, even if it came to a morbid outcome. Both Elrod and the child back in the Mexican prison prove that there are so many others out there just like the kid. No matter how hard this world tries to invoke civility amongst themselves, this exceptionally cruel and greedy kill-or-be-killed world just shatters that dream and sadly adds fuel to the judge's arguments. And the life lesson for Elrod's younger brother is the story of the harness maker echoing all over again. This younger brother is doomed now, with this sacred image of Elrod hanging over him and his killer too. Even after all these years, the judge is still living rent-free in the man's head, no matter how hard he tries to escape him. Later on, the man rides into town and enters a bar for a drink. There is a bear dancing on a stage with a young girl who plays the organ, whilst her father collects money in his hat. Even after all these years, the man sees the judge amongst many kinds of man, described from thief to drunkard to soldier and so on, but the man tries to ignore his presence. When suddenly, a muted disagreement between the man collecting money and the drunken customer breaks out, which tragically leads to the bear being shot and killed. Beginning the final conversation, not just between the man and the judge, but between the only two survivors of the long-lost Glanton gang. Someone had seized the pistol arm of the man who'd done the shooting, and the gun was waving aloft. The owner of the bear stood stunned, clutching the brim of his old world hat. "Shot the goddamn bear," said the barman. The little girl unbuckled herself out of the barrel organ, and it clattered wheezing to the floor. She ran forward and knelt and gathered the great shaggy head up in her arms and began to rock back and forth sobbing. Most of the men in the room had risen and they stood in the smoky yellow space with their hands on their sidearms, while flocks of whores were scuttling towards the rear and a woman mounted to the boards and stepped past the bear and held out her hands. "It's all over," she said. "It's all over. Do you believe it's all over, son?" He turned. The judge was standing at the bar looking down at him. He smiled. He removed his hat. The great pale dome of his skull shone like an enormous phosphorant egg in the lamplight. "The last of the true, the last of the true. I'd say they're all gone under now, saving me and thee, would you not?" He tried to see past him. That great corpus enshadowed him from all beyond. He could hear the woman announcing the commencement of dancing in the hall to the rear. "And some are not yet born who shall have cause to curse the orphan's soul," said the judge. He turned slightly. "Plenty of time for the dance." "I ain't studying no dance," the judge smiled. The Tyrolean and another man were bent over the bear. The girl was sobbing, the front of her dress dark with blood. The judge leaned across the bar and seized a bottle and snapped the cork out of it with his thumb. The cork whined off into the blackness above the lamps like a bullet. He rifled a great drink down his throat and leaned back against the bar. "You're here for the dance," he said. "I got to go." The judge looked aggrieved. "Go?" he said. He nodded. He reached and took hold of his hat where it lay on the bar, but he didn't take it up and he didn't move. "What man would not be a dancer if he could?" said the judge. "It's a great thing, the dance." The woman was kneeling and had her arm around the little girl. The candle sputtered and the great hairy mound of the bear, dead in its crinoline, lay like some monsters slain in the commission of an unnatural act. The judge poured the tumbler full where it stood empty alongside the hat and nudged it forward. "Drink up," he said. "Drink up. This night thy soul may be required of thee." He looked at the glass. The judge smiled and gestured with the bottle. He took up the glass and drank. The judge watched him. "Was it always your idea," he said, "that if you did not speak you would not be recognised?" "You see me." The judge ignored this. "I recognised you when I first saw you, and yet you were a disappointment to me, then and now. Even so, at the last, I find you here with me." "I ain't with you." The judge raised his bald brow. "Not?" he said. He looked about him in a puzzled and artful way, and he was passable thespian. "I never come here hunting you." "What then?" said the judge. "What would I want with you? I came here the same reason as any man." "And what reason is that?" "What reason is what?" "That these men are here." "They come here to have a good time." The judge watched him. He began to point out various men in the room and to ask if those men were here for a good time or if indeed they knew why they were here at all. "Everybody don't have a reason to be someplace." "That's so," said the judge. "They do not have to have a reason, but order is not set aside because of their indifference." He regarded the judge warily. "Let me put it this way," said the judge. "If it is so that they themselves have no reason yet are indeed here, must they not be here by reason of some other? And if this is so, can you guess who that other might be?" "No. Can you?" "I know him well." He poured the tumbler full once more and took a drink himself from the bottle, and he wiped his mouth and turned to regard the room. "This is an orchestration for an event. For a dance, in fact. The participants will be apprised of their roles at the proper time. For now, it is enough that they have arrived. As the dance is the thing with which we are concerned and contains complete within itself its own arrangement and history and finale, there is no necessity that the dancers contain these things within themselves as well. In any event, the history of all is not the history of each, nor indeed the sum of those histories. And none here can finally comprehend the reason for his presence, for he has no way of knowing even in what the event consists. In fact, were he to know, he might well absent himself, and you can see that that cannot be any part of the plan, if plan there be. He smiled, his great teeth shone, he drank. An event, a ceremony, the orchestration thereof, the overture carries certain marks of decisiveness. It includes the slaying of a large bear. The evening's progress will not appear strange or unusual even to those who question the rightness of the event so ordered. A ceremony, then. One could well argue that there are not categories of ceremony, but only ceremonies of greater or lesser degree, and deferring to this argument, we will say that this is a ceremony of a certain magnitude, perhaps more commonly called a ritual. A ritual includes the letting of blood. Rituals which fail in this requirement are but mock rituals. Here every man knows the force at once. Never doubt it. That feeling in the breast that evokes a child's memory of loneliness, such as when the others have gone and only the game is left with its solitary participant. A solitary game without opponent, where only the rules are at hazard. Don't look away. We're not speaking in mysteries. You of all men are no stranger to that feeling, the emptiness and the despair. It is that which we took arms against, is it not? Is not blood the tempering agent and the mortar which bonds? The judge leaned closer. What do you think death is, man? Of whom do we speak when we speak of a man who was and is not? Are these blind riddles, or are they not some part of every man's jurisdiction? What is death if not an agency? And who does he intend toward? Look at me. I don't like craziness. Nor I. Bear with me. Look at them now. Pick a man, any man. That man there. See him? That man. Hatless. You know his opinion of the world, you can read it in his face and his stance, yet his complaints that a man's life is no bargain masks the actual case with him, which is that men will not do as he wishes them to. Have never done, never will do. That's the way of things with him, and his life is so balked about by difficulty and becomes so altered of its intended architecture that he is little more than a walking hovel, hardly fit to house the human spirit at all. Can he say, such a man, that there is no malign thing set against him? That there is no power and no force and no cause? What manner of heretic could doubt agency and claim it alike? Can he believe that the wreckage of his existence is unentailed, no liens, no creditors, that gods of vengeance and of compassion alike lie sleeping in their crypt, and whether our cries are for an accounting or for the destruction of the ledgers altogether, they must evoke only the same silence, and that is this silence which will prevail. To whom is he talking, man? Can't you see him? The man was indeed muttering to himself and peering balefully about the room where it seemed there was no friend to him. A man seeks his own destiny and no other, said the judge, will or nil. Any man who could discover his own fate and elect therefore some opposite course could only come at last to that self-same reckoning at the same appointed time. For each man's destiny is as large as the world he inhabits and contains within it all opposites as well. This desert upon which so many have been broken is vast and calls for largeness of heart, but is also ultimately empty. It is hard, it is barren, its very nature is stone. He poured the tumbler full. Drink up, he said. The world goes on. We have dancing nightly, and this night is no exception. The straight and the winding way are one, and now that you are here, what do the years count since last we two met together? Man's memories are uncertain, and the past that was differs little to the past that was not. He took up the tumbler the judge had poured, and he drank and set it down again. He looked at the judge. I've been everywhere, he said. This is just one more place. The judge arched his brow. Did you post witnesses, he said, to report to you on the continuing existence of those places once you quit them? That's crazy. Is it? Where is yesterday? Where is Glanton and Brown? And where's the priest? He leaned closer. Where is Shelby, whom you left to the mercies of Elias in the desert? And where is Tate, whom you abandoned in the mountains? Where are the ladies? Ah, the fair and tender ladies with whom you danced at the governor's ball when you were a hero, anointed with the blood of the enemies of the republic you'd elected to defend. And where is the fiddler? And where is the dance? I guess you can tell me. I tell you this. As war becomes dishonoured and its nobility called into question, those honourable men who recognise the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance, and the dancers false dancers. And yet there will be one there always who is a true dancer. And can you guess who that might be? You ain't nothing. You speak truer than you know, but I will tell you. Only that man who has offered himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of the pit and seen horror in the round and learned at last that it speaks his inmost heart, only that man can dance. Even a dumb animal can dance. The judge set the bottle on the bar. Hear me, man. There is room on the stage for one beast and one beast alone. All others are destined for a night that is eternal and without name. One by one they will step down into the darkness before the footlamps, bears that dance, bears that don't. The man decides to walk away at this point, heading to the rear of the bar where card games are played before eventually heading upstairs, where a dwarf prostitute seeks him out and brings him into her room. Once the deed is done, the man seems apprehensive to leave, despite the prostitute trying to hurry him out the door, but eventually, with remorse, the man heads back downstairs. He stands on the edge of the dance floor and watches as the dancers and musicians prepare. McCarthy says in one sentence, "Outside in the darkened lot, groups of wretched Tonkawas stood in the mud with their faces composed in strange lost portraits within the sashwork of the window lights." I personally believe McCarthy is speaking quite spiritually here. I don't think there are huge groups of native Indians watching in from the windows, literally. The way he words it with phrases like strange lost portraits suggests to me that it's a reflection or a memory, perhaps the man's guilt coming to the surface having recently seen the judge and having it all brought back up again. Or maybe again in the judge's mystical ways, a spiritual sign of that ritual and dance that the judge spoke of. Instead of joining the growing dance and the bustling excitement across the bar, the man humbly leaves out of the back door. He looks up at the night sky and sees stars crashing and shooting across the darkness, much like the night of his birth. As he heads on down slowly to the Jakes, on his way he hears people calling for the little girl whose bear had died, for it seems she was suddenly lost. He went down the walkboard toward the Jakes. He stood outside listening to the voices fading away, and he looked again at the silent tracks of the stars where they died over the darkened hills. Then he opened the rough board door of the Jakes and stepped in. The judge was seated upon the closet. He was naked, and he rose up smiling, and gathered him in his arms against his immense and terrible flesh, and shot the wooden bar latch home behind it. In the saloon, two men who wanted to buy the hide were looking for the owners of the bear. The bear lay on the stage in an immense pool of blood. All the candles had gone out save one, and it guttered uneasily in its grease like a votive lamp. In the dance hall, a young man had joined the fiddler, and he kept the measure of the music with a pair of spoons, which he clapped between his knees. The horse sashayed half naked, some with their breasts exposed. In the mudded dog-yard behind the premises, two men went down the boards towards the Jakes. A third man was standing there, urinating into the mud. "Is someone in there?" the first man said. The man who was relieving himself did not look up. "I wouldn't go in there if I was you," he said. "Is there someone in there?" "I wouldn't go in." He hitched himself up and buttoned his trousers and stepped past them and went up the walk towards the lights. The first man watched him go and then opened the door of the Jakes. "Good God Almighty," he said. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He stepped past the other and went back up the walk. The other man stood looking after him. Then he opened the door and looked in. In the saloon they had rolled the dead bear onto a wagon sheet, and there was a general call for hands. In the anteroom the tobacco smoke circled the lamps like an evil fog, and the men bid and dealt in a low mutter. There was a lull in the dancing, and a second fiddler took the stage, and the two plucked their strings and turned the little hardwood pegs until they were satisfied. Many among the dancers were staggering drunk through the room, and some had rid themselves of shirts and hackers and stood bare-chested and sweating, even though the room was cold enough to cloud their breath. An enormous horse stood clapping her hands at the bandstand and calling drunkenly for the music. She wore nothing but a pair of men's drawers, and some of her sisters were likewise, clad in what appeared to be trophies, hats or pantaloons or blue twill cavalry jackets. As the music soared up there was a lively cry from all, and a caller stood to the front and called out the dance, and the dancers stomped and hooted and lurched against one another. And they were dancing. The board floor slamming under the jackboots and the fiddlers grinning hideously over their canted pieces. Towering over them all is the judge, and he is naked, dancing, his small feet lively and quick, and now in double time, and bowing to the ladies, huge and pale and hairless, like an enormous infant. He never sleeps, he says. He says he'll never die. He bows to the fiddlers and sachets backwards and throws back his head and laughs deep in his throat, and he is a great favourite, the judge. He wafts his hat, and the lunar dome of his skull passes palely under the lamps, and he swings about and takes possession of one of the fiddles, and he pirouettes and makes a pass, 2 passes, dancing and fiddling at once. His feet are light and nimble, he never sleeps. He says that he will never die. He dances in light and in the shadow, and he is a great favourite. He never sleeps, the judge. He is dancing, dancing. He says that he will never die. The end. Whew, okay, awful lot to break down there. What the hell did it all mean? Let's start with the final conversation between the man and the judge. It's all come to the boil here in this final conversation between the last 2 survivors of the gang. The man has come to his own conclusion that the judge is nothing more than trouble. Trouble that the man doesn't need as he tries to compensate for his past and try to become a good person now, despite his past still dictating who that supposed good person is today, and those old habits still rearing their ugly head, with situations like Elrod and often seeing the judge's ideals unfortunately be proven to have some validity to them, such as with finding of the death cart. There is some small part of the man that fears that the judge might be right, that sits very uneasily with him, and the judge on the other hand is basically teasing the man, outright telling him that many of these situations come to be because the judge makes it so with simple manipulation, much like with the second coin, as if he's playing Grand Theft Auto and we're all the NPCs at his disposal, practically confirming it when the kid says, "You ain't nothing," and the judge replies, "You speak truer than you know." We've already seen the judge mock a group of idiots by leading them into a false religion where you should worship rocks, so is it too hard to believe that this religion of war is also just another mocking control tactic from the judge? The judge even teases the man that he's going to die tonight and he hasn't got a clue, saying, "Tonight thine soul may be required of thee." That this ritual is all here for him, and had he known his role in it, he may have absented himself, still dressing it all up as part and parcel of his ideology. As much as the judge teases the man, he still offers one last chance, to be the only dancer on the stage, to win this supposed manufactured game of the judges. As the last 2 members of the gang, they are essentially in the judge's mind the final players of this particular game. For men love games and must play for stakes for it to have meaning, and to the judge, those stakes were always life and death. But the man, practical and matter-of-fact as ever, argues back with the judge's ideals, again pointing out that all of this is just constructed by the judge himself, another form of his manipulation that even a bear can dance. But without fully recognising the danger he's in, he grows tired of the endless sea of answers to his arguments and realises that leaving is the only way to have no part in this, which sadly seals his fate in the role of the victim, of which the judge just ridiculed so deeply, and therefore makes the man a bear that doesn't dance. He refuses to play the game despite being the only player left. Whilst the man still isn't interested in giving much weight to the judge's ramblings, he should, because the judge goes on to mention the spilling of blood in these settings form a ritual, and that any without blood are but mock rituals. And of course, we have already had the death of a bear. He taunts and teases the man with the past, eerily knowing things that he simply shouldn't, about Tate and Shelby, for nobody was there to witness that but the kid, just adding further to the judge's supernatural mystique. Or is he just a trickster taking educated guesses? And when you recall these rituals the judge has performed throughout the book, notice how so many of them manipulated situations happened moments before tragedy or death, and equally in celebration. Most parties in this story have also ended with bloodshed in one way, shape or form, often at the judge's hand. This isn't a mistake. I think the thing with the judge is he is as powerful as you wish him to be. And that's kind of the point. If you fall into his legend, you'll see a god, a demigod, potentially even Satan. But if you look at the manipulation, the evil acts and the coin tricks, you'll see a psychotic man who tricked, swindled every single person he crossed paths with into his bidding with an endless sea of lies. We'll never truly know, but by the end of the story, Judge Holden's legend makes him a frozen idol of sort over the rest of the gang. He is the only survivor. the one with the seemingly happy ending who seems to be proven right come the end, or at least forces the situation to make him be right in the end. And that last part is the contradiction. Would a god need to manipulate and lie? Would a god hang out with a bunch of scalp hunters? Perform circus tricks with coins to sell ideals? The judge may just be a man who is hell-bent on being remembered as being so much more than that. Potentially a god, whether by truth or by lie. And dancing is very much being used as a double meaning here, quite literally to dance joyously and celebrate what you do, but to the judge it also means to act, to do, to live in open honesty of yourself and to accept what you are, even if what you are is a killer, a warrior, a survivor, the one true dancer alone on the stage. Which is interesting when you consider we just had a dancing bear on the stage, of which was killed. On one hand, being another visual representation of an animal being warped out of its own nature by the greed of man, but a metaphor for the man being the judge's new pet and plaything if he were to dance, and still be against his own nature at the judge's command. Even potentially his death that would come from doing so. The man is quite literally damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. I think that finally dawns on him when he's due to leave the prostitute's room, hence the sudden apprehension. Does he give himself over to the judge's crazy ideals and become this cold, vicious killer that he has wanted to be and become the next Glanton dancing upon the stage only to inevitably find death? Or does he walk away lying to himself, pretending to be someone that he isn't, carrying a Bible that he can't even read? A life shadowed in guilt, shame and repression, being the only survivor of your own history and simply waiting for death to come to you in a violent world. Bears that dance, and bears that don't. In walking away from the dance floor, or growing ritual should I say, with its ghostly apparitions in the window and spilt blood, the kid is choosing not to dance, not to act and live his life, honestly as the judge so wishes. Which of course, the judge simply cannot accept. Not after all these years, especially when the kid was his prime idea of what a man should be. This brings about the tarot cards once more for the final time, where the inverted Four of Cups rings true again. The man turns down the opportunity to dance, to partake in life and live. He remains in his solitude and misery, escaping a past he himself can't let go of. He inverted the card when returning it to the deck, and it's he who decides not to dance. But that's not all. I also mentioned a potential third meaning when the woman says, "Carriage of the dead, full of bones, the boy that," before being interrupted when doing Glanton's reading. Is there a chance that she may have been predicting the kid's death here at the very end? The kid is often referred to being lost. The Hermit specifically stated, "lost your way in the dark," and now this woman is talking about being lost in the night. The kid was born under a meteor shower and also dies under one, which could be a reference to that curse and the wicked wind. With a carriage of the dead and full of bones, the boy that could well be the kid's desecrated remains in the outhouse, or carriage without wheels, if you will. Admittedly, that could be a bit of a stretch. I'm not saying that's absolutely accurate, but it obviously means something. I don't think McCarthy would put it in there and cut it short for no reason in such a teasing way. So the judge is waiting for the man, naked, in the bathroom, and grabs him on entry and locks him inside with him, never to be seen again. The judge brutally murders the man and most likely assaulted him too in the process, considering the nudity and the fact that he wanted him all those years ago in the jail cell. Goes on to celebrate, laughing, dancing, claiming he never sleeps and he will never die, because the judge won, at least according to him and his beliefs, that he is the one true dancer on the stage, the great favourite. He offered the man a chance to do so, but he refused, and in so became an enemy. And in war, we decimate our enemies, and of course, war is God. I have seen some people suggest that the judge cheats by killing the man to get the outcome that he wants, but I don't necessarily see it as cheating at all. Because what is cheating in this world, in war? It's such a kill or be killed environment. Agree with his ideals or die, and that's exactly what happens. The judge, a seemingly supernatural man, kills the man, and possibly the little girl too, during a ritual before celebrating a night that will never end and claims eternal life. Whether he has in this final moment become war itself, a god, or he always was, this final dance is the judge's celebration of victory. But the story isn't completely over. We do finish on an ever so slightly brighter note with this very brief epilogue to bring the story to a whole. In the dawn there is a man progressing over the plains by means of holes which he is making in the ground. He uses an implement with 2 handles, and he chucks it into the hole, and he enkindles the stone in the hole with his steel, hole by hole, striking fire out of the rock that God had put in there. On the plain behind him are the wanderers in search of bones, and those who do not search, and they move haltingly in the light like mechanisms whose movements are monitored with escapement and palate, so that they appear restrained by a prudence or reflectiveness which has no inner reality, and they cross in their progress one by one that track of holes that runs to the rim of the visible ground, and which seems less the pursuit of some continuance than the verification of a principle, a validation of sequence and causality if the each round and perfect hole owed its existence to the one before it, there on the prairie upon which are the bones and the gatherers of bones, and those who do not gather. He strikes fire in the hole, and he draws out his steel. Then they all move on again. The epilogue offers a slightly nicer finishing note. As a man makes holes in the ground and strikes a stone he uncovers in the hole before moving on to the next hole in the row. I believe this is the beginning of borders being formed. That civility ultimately has prevailed just as much as war has endured, being contrasted by bone collectors cleaning up the past, as well as those who do not collect, which of course is ringing back to the judge's speech of bears that dance and bears that do not, suggesting these ideals remain present, and as per usual, there was some truth in it. Again, the idea that all trades attain to war again. The judge also mentioned that man's memory is flimsy and history is essentially written by the victors. And here we are cleaning up bones and tidying up the horrors we committed to present a kinder, more civilized image. Despite these very actions unintentionally proving truth to the judge's statements about lying about your true nature. And yet, I also feel it gives the man some justice too. That civility will fight back against evil, and not only survive, but it will prosper too as an industrial revolution sits on the horizon. Cormac McCarthy also does this pretty cool thing with his novels, where each ending quietly hints at what the next novel might be. The best example of this would be the end of No Country for Old Men, where Sheriff Bell tells his wife of a dream that he had about his father carrying the light in a horn.
When he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon.
McCarthy's next novel was The Road, a story of a father and a son travelling the apocalyptic wastelands, speaking of carrying a light in your heart.
And are you carrying the fire?
My what?
Carrying the fire.
The novel after Blood Meridian was All the Pretty Horses, a story I am yet to read, but understand is still set across Texas and Mexico about 70 years after the end of Blood Meridian, where 2 men wish to seek out the romanticised lifestyle of cowboys from old, only to discover the harsh realities that shatter their optimistic views of the world, which seems like the perfect follow-on from where this outstanding novel leaves off. It's not vital information, but it's a cool detail that just makes me love this guy's work even more. In conclusion, Blood Meridian is a deeply philosophical and boldly explorative narrative that questions the fabric and structures of life itself, its meaning, its pointlessness, and how violence is so often rewarded or is required to advance even in basic nature of animals' survival, asking so frequently what god or gods would create such wonder and yet allow it all to be tarnished by blood, and how on earth a young man is ever to become a decent human being in such surroundings without guidance. And it's not just for the kid, it's cyclical. Throughout history, with the spoils going to the victor, whilst the innocent pay for the crimes of those seeking power and dominance over something they simply can't control. It's painfully honest and beautifully poetic, with its use of language always reminding you of that angle of fate, as if this was always going to happen, that you, the reader, were always going to turn the next page and discover the character's fate in turn. This was a game changer for me, a mind blower. I love it deeply, and I sincerely hope I have done Cormac McCarthy's phenomenal work the justice it deserves. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my analysis of Blood Meridian, or The Evening Redness in the West, by Cormac McCarthy. Thank you so much for watching this video. This has been a real passion project. I read this book all the way back in August 2024. It's now November 2025. That's how much research and effort I've put into this thing. So please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you are new, please do share this with your friends and family. It would mean the absolute world to me. And of course, if you disagree with anything I've said in the book, please understand it is just my interpretation and my research. Please, I'd love to hear what you made of it. I'm very open to discussion. Just be civil about it. Don't go calling people names or saying you're wrong, rah, rah, rah. Let's have a conversation, you know? I'm happy to have that. And I would love to hear some of your readings and ideas of it. I absolutely adore this book. It put me through the ringer. I've not read anything like it It's truly something special. It's certainly special to me. I hope I've done it the justice that I think it deserves. I really hope you've enjoyed this. I hope this video has helped you out in your studies of this book, or if just a general understanding of it. Thank you so much. I am going to have a shave and have a lie down. Take care. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Yeehaw! No, cut that. Cut that. That was bad. No.